ככה. היה פה אזור ישיבה לילדים. Je passe maintenant le micro.
Welcome to this special broadcast on I-24 News. I'm Khalid Ben David. It's day 34 of Israel's war against Hamas. We expect the Defense Minister Yoav Gallant to speak in the coming minutes. We'll bring you that live. This has been an eventful day on several fronts. The IDF reporting major progress in its Gaza ground operations, saying its forces have taken control of key Hamas military strongholds in and around Gaza City. Now, falling in those battles is reserves Master Sergeant Dov Moshe Kogen, bringing to 35 the number of IDF troops killed in Gaza. A major flare-up in the West Bank today as IDF troops clash with terrorists in Jenin, uncovering a weapons cache there. 14 Palestinians reported killed in that firefight, and 2 more in clashes near the city of Bethlehem. Meanwhile, in the Red Sea resort of Eilat, a drone managed to slip through Israel's air defense systems and explode on impact at a school building. No injuries reported. It's not yet clear from where the drone was launched, but it was reportedly Iranian-made. And just in the past hours, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad terror group released videos of 2 Israeli hostages being held in Gaza. 77-year-old Hana Katsir and 13-year-old Yagil Yaakov, both of them kidnapped from kibbutz near Oz. Islamic Jihad said that the 2, both of whom reportedly suffer from health issues, will be released, quote, for humanitarian reasons. Now, as in previous instances, I-24 News will not air those videos in accordance with the wishes of the hostages' family. Well, joining me in studio are defense correspondent Jonathan Regev, Middle East correspondent Ariel Osseron. A lot going on, gentlemen. Jonathan, some updates from you.
So, as you mentioned, a lot going on in the past 30-40 minutes. Let's begin with Eilat. There was a red alert siren about 15 minutes ago, and now confirmation from the IDF that an object was flying towards Eilat and was intercepted by the Arrow missile defense system way outside the Israeli borders, meaning much to the south of Israel. Of course, the usual suspect would be Yemen. This is not the first time, as you said. The Arrow missile defense system is meant to intercept threats coming from far away, long-range threats, and this seems to be the case. A drone, possibly, which was sent from Yemen and was detected and intercepted far away from the Israeli coast, possibly a ground-to-ground missile,
right.
and was intercepted. And yet the siren sounded in Eilat, sending people to shelter, because of course once you detect it first, you want everybody to be safe, and then of course try to
intercept it. And of course earlier today those systems failed to detect this drone. Also, we had a briefing from Daniel Hagari, the IDF spokesman, spoke a little earlier this evening, talking about progress on the ground in Gaza, so much so that even the chief of staff managed and the head of the Shabak, Shin Bet, went into Gaza.
That is true, and I think that's a very strong message. The message is the commanders are at the front. Going into Gaza is dangerous. It's very dangerous. dangerous. Do you want to put your chief of staff, your head of the internal security agency? Do you want to put your people in that danger? Maybe not, but you do want to send a message. The commanders are at the front. They're not just watching it from their headquarters in Tel Aviv. They're with the forces up front, with their sending their message of support from the ground. We've seen Herzi Halevi on the ground before. We've seen the head of the Southern Command, Yaron Finkelman. We also have seen him before, and today both the chief of staff and the chief of the Israeli the Internal Security Agency out there sending a message: we're here, we're with you, we're with the forces. The commanders are here and not back at the headquarters.
All right, Ariel, the other major headline of the past couple of hours: proof of life of 2 of the 239 confirmed hostages in Gaza.
Indeed, this is a video released by Palestinian Islamic Jihad, not Hamas, and it's important to clarify that on October 7th, when thousands of Gazans came into Israel, a lot of them were Hamas fighters, Hamas terrorists, but also Palestinian Islamic Jihad, also the other smaller terror groups in the Gaza Strip, as well as thousands of civilians. It is believed that all these groups are holding Israeli hostages, and that makes it all the more complicated. These two, Chana and Yagil from Nir Oz, one of the hardest hit kibbutzim in the area surrounding the Gaza Strip, they are in their late 70s and 13. They are believed, or at least according to Palestinian Islamic Jihad, they're claiming that they will potentially be released down the line because of their health issues. But again, the fact that beyond just showing their images and their names, that they're a proof of life, other than that, there is no added value to showing these videos. It is propaganda and psychological warfare on behalf of Palestinian Islamic Jihad, like we've seen on behalf of Hamas. And so, albeit there is a silver lining of a proof of life, the video is something that we chose not to air, also at the request of the family. And this just shows the complexity that you have. Hamas has hostages, Palestinian Islamic Jihad has hostages, and also regular civilians in Gaza are holding hostages. And that just shows how complicated the situation is.
All right, Jonathan Regev did prepare this report on some of the military activities of the IDF today. Let's take a look at that.
The Israeli flag rises high and the anthem is heard on the Gaza beachfront deep inside the Gaza Strip. Shortly after, IDF tanks appear on the beach road running down the Gaza City coastline. Step by step, the IDF takes on a bigger part of Gaza City. As the forces move forward, they once again see how in Gaza there's no distinction between terror and civilian infrastructure. This stairway leads to a terror lab where explosives are made and suicide drones are manufactured. Next to it is a shaft leading to a terror tunnel, and what's right next door? A room where 3 little girls used to live, right next to the terrorists.
October 7th came from here. Came from houses like this. From houses like this, 1,500 Israelis were murdered or slaughtered.
The main Hamas headquarters are mostly located under the Gaza ground. Those above the ground are well entrenched in residential areas where civilians are used as human shields. As opposed to Hamas, the IDF is interested in keeping civilians away from the fight.
We're trying not to harm innocent people. We give all the people that live here a good heads up that we're coming. They need to evacuate till the Gaza Lake, which is going south.
While this is happening in Gaza, there's no let-up of the anti-terror activity in the West Bank. A major operation took place in the city of Jenin on Thursday morning, as IDF forces entered the city under heavy fire from local terrorists. Palestinian reports say as many as 10 militants were killed in the operation, as other Israeli forces also entered the Balata refugee camp in the city of Nablus, another terror stronghold in the West Bank. Along with the northern border, there are 3 constant active arenas, meaning the IDF is fully stretched and ready to engage on all of them.
And Jonathan, again, all this progress has Israel, the IDF in Gaza, pushing closer to, of course, the target of the Shifa hospital, believed to be sort of the main command center of Hamas in Gaza.
That is correct. The Shifa hospital in central Gaza, the main hospital of the Gaza Strip, and as the IDF spokesperson already exposed some 2 weeks ago, under the Shifa hospital, there's no parking lot or anything. It's not civilian matters which are dealt with, but Hamas headquarters, tunnels, and an operations room, and possibly some of the leading Hamas figures may be hiding there. We don't know, but that's what is thought to be under the Shifa hospital. Right. Maybe even within the Shifa hospital itself. The forces are of course closing in. Going into a hospital, conquering a hospital, of course, may create a humanitarian issue, which may create a global outcry. But at least for now, the Israeli forces are moving in slowly but decisively.
All right, let's go to our correspondent, Robert Swift. He's down in the south near Gaza, Kibbutz Ruchama, where certainly sort of a special initiative is being taken. A lot happening and a lot of focus on the hostages this evening, Robert.
That's right. We're down here at this event so that we could speak to some of the hostages, and we're going to bring interviews that we've done with, with some of the families of the hostages, and we're going to bring some of the interviews with them to you shortly. But even whilst we're here at this event, the backdrop behind me, you'll see, is in the direction of Gaza. Not the lights you can immediately see, that's an Israeli community, but beyond that is the Gaza Strip. And behind me, we're hearing constant booms and explosions as some of the combat that Jonathan was just describing is taking place. A short while ago, we saw an enormous airstrike, easily the largest explosion that we've seen here during the entire month of this reporting. There was a substantial explosion. And that is all part of the effort by the IDF to essentially to get at the Hamas infrastructure, which is around the Shifa hospital area. But that's not the only front where this is taking place. There's also, of course, activity taking place elsewhere in the country, including in Eilat, where half an hour ago, once again, there was rocket alarms were ringing out in that southern city. This is understood, the Israeli military have said that this was a missile that was fired and that they used the Arrow 3 system, which is a high-altitude interception system. They used that to intercept the missile over the Red Sea. This comes several hours after a drone impacted in the city of Eilat. There's no confirmation on where these attacks originated from, but obviously it's already been seen previously in this war that the Houthi organization, which is based in Yemen and which has essentially declared war on Israel, that it has launched a number of very long-range attacks using drones and using missiles towards Israel, some of them even impacting in Egypt at times.
Right, and maybe just, Robert, explain what the event there at Kibbutz Ruchama that I alluded to, what their project is this evening.
So essentially what they're doing is they're using a laser display onto a screen to list the names and ages of all those hostages who are still right now inside Gaza. They're using this as a sort of memorial. As in their words, it was to cast light in the darkness, and this is an attempt by them to display the names and to send hope to those people who are trapped in Gaza.
All right. Robert Swift, this down in Kibbutz Ruchama. Thank you for that. Gentlemen, another very active front today. The West Bank area, we have seen major clashes, some of the biggest, I think, in really even in months, especially in the Jenin area.
Indeed, for the second time today, Israeli forces operating in Jenin, uncovering an underground cache of explosive devices, as well as taking out 12, eliminating 12 terror suspects. The Palestinians are reporting that the casualties are up at 14, as well as arresting 12 suspects, terror suspects. And this comes as earlier in the day, the IDF dropped leaflets over Jenin saying, if you don't want us to come back, stop with the terror. And, you know, Jenin is kind of the West Bank, Jenin specifically, has been taking a back seat in terms of the news cycle, because we've been talking obviously more about what's been going on the southern front as well as the northern border. But the West Bank has not stopped, has not calmed down ever since the war started, since October 7th. We're talking about nearly 1,400 arrests, about 1,000, over 2,000 arrests, nearly 1,000 of those are Hamas members. And this shows that the IDF, Shin Bet, police, and all Israeli security forces continue to go after Hamas, not only in Gaza and not only in the West Bank. There's also a report on the Palestinian side that while Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas, is now in Cairo visiting, meeting with Egyptian heads of intelligence, it was reported that there was an agreement by Israel that they would not hurt him. That's probably not an accurate report, and there probably was no such arrangement, but that just shows the level of fear that they have among themselves, that they're being targeted not only in Gaza, not only in the West Bank, but also potentially leadership abroad.
Right. And Jonathan, you mentioned the IDF Chief of Staff, Herzl Halevi, going inside Gaza for the first time. We have one of his comments from there. Let's take a listen.
Our main point of strength are our partnerships. I look around and see the IDF. In every corner, everyone is doing everything to make you as strong as possible. Keep moving forward, thoroughly. Increase the pace. We are behind you.
All right, correction. It was the second time he won. It was the first time that Ronen Bar, the head of the Israel Security Agency, better known as the Shin Bet or Shabak, entered into Gaza. And of course, the Shin Bet playing a key role in intelligence in determining really which targets to strike here, and of course, any information that might be on the hostages.
Of course, the Shin Bet, the Internal Security Agency, they're basically they're the ones meant to along with the intelligence directorate of the army, basically provide the intelligence. Where are the hostages? Where is the Hamas leadership? Where are the tunnels exactly? You can't just go in. It was very clear. Hamas knew very well that after such an attack, such as the one on October 7th, the Israeli army will storm in. They've been preparing for this. Therefore, storming in with major power, that may not be the wisest thing. That's why perhaps it took Israel some time to organize and to think exactly what would be the right thing to do. That is why it took nearly 3 weeks for the ground operation to begin, and now we're seeing how it is successful. Now we're seeing that in practically every time there's clashes with Hamas terrorists, they all end with IDF victory. They all end with tens of terrorists killed. That is because there's concrete intelligence. All that concrete intelligence, which was so dearly and severely missing on October 7th, is now appearing, and that is what allows the IDF to go in slowly but decisively.
All right, and we do have, as I said, information now on two of the hostages, proof of life. One of them, Yagil Yaakov, 13 years old, kidnapped from kibbutz near Oz with his older brother, Or Yaakov. Now, just last week, I spoke with their mother, Renana Gomez, about their situation and having her children taken hostage like that. Here is what she had to say to us. Oh, we have Yoav Gallant. I'm sorry. Let's go to the defense minister.
Since the ground operation began, Hamas is being beaten badly. It receives one blow after another. Our fighters advance, executing their duties with great success. I say this evening as well, we will not stop the fighting until we return the hostages. We will do any action in order to do so. At this time, in the Gaza Strip are dozens of children. Some of them have seen their parents die in front of their eyes. Those animals have taken them and holding them. We will not stop the fighting until we return our children home. As a father, I wish to ask the entire world, what sort of father stops searching for his children? I see them as my children. I will not stop the fighting, and I will not stop searching for them until I get to them. The fighters in Gaza are in the heart of the city. They're in the outskirts of the Shati refugee camp near the Shifa hospital, near the Gaza port. Those terrorists who are underground, under Shifa, hear loudly the thunder of the tanks and the bulldozers on the ground. They hear under the ground and shaking of fear. The IDF has begun using new methods in these days to take care of those who are in the tunnels and for the elimination of tunnels, and that will improve in the coming days. All of our troops are working in order to find unique solutions to these challenges. We work and we succeed. I say here again, we will reach anyone who operated against Israeli civilians, anyone who kidnapped and hurt women and children. We'll get to all of them. It will take a week, it will take a month, it will take a year, and if it needs to, it will take years. We will not let go. We will take all of them down. They have no place under the sun. There'll be no compromise with those who hurt our civilians and murdered them. Also in the northern front, things are not quiet. Hamas and Hezbollah continue to hurt Israeli civilians and receiving blows, one blow after another. Our forces are set up with strong defense all over the northern front. Our pilots are sitting in the cockpit ready for order, facing northward. This war, it is the most justified war and the most decent war that the people of Israel have experienced since they've established their state 75 years ago. We're fighting against evil. We're fighting against an enemy that attempts to hurt us, and we're fighting against those who wanted to show their murder and brutality in order to scare us and take us away from our country. I met the reservists today, and I was impressed. I saw thousands of fighters who are only interested in beating Hamas. They said to me, we will stay here a month or stay here a year. We will do whatever it takes until we reach victory. These people left their homes, left their families, left their businesses, left their work. They all understand the meaning, but say, we will not stop, will not. If there's anyone that did not understand why we need a reserve army, well, he understands that very well today. At the end of 2023, there's not one person in the state of Israel that does not understand why we need a reserve army. There's not one person who doesn't understand the importance of them. I salute them. I salute also the industrial security industries and all of those who work for us 24/7 on the ground, in the support and in the industry. Another word on the future. As the tanks and the fighters are in the heart of the Gaza City, the pilots and the Navy fighters are firing at this hour. There's also a process of renewal. Volunteers that come from all walks of life and help the farmers on the Gaza border communities. They understand that agriculture is a vital part as well. We will sow the seeds and will return to life of routine. I wish to express my appreciation to all of those who are taking part in this important task. The strong spirit of the public, together with the impressive ability of the IDF, will bring us back to where we need to be. It is happening, it is advancing. I wish to show much appreciation for all of those who complete those tasks. Thank you.
All right, we just heard the Defense Minister Yoav Gallant there, basically giving a summary of the current situation, things we've been discussing in the studio. No new information really put out there. Now, just before we went to the Defense Minister, I did mention that last week I spoke with Renana Gomez, the mother of Yagil Yaakov, the 13-year-old who was being held hostage in Gaza. And as I mentioned this evening, Palestinian Islamic Jihad released a video of him. I spoke with Renana Gomez, who's also her other son, 16-year-old Or Yaakov, is also being held in the Gaza Strip, about that situation. Here's what she had to say to us.
I would just want the world to enlist to the effort of releasing them as soon as possible. Mainly children. There are 32 children from the age of 9 months to the age of 17 that were taken from their homes. Just imagine it was your child taken from your home, from their own bedroom, in your house, taken, dragged into a tunnel somewhere, thrown into the darkness. Children should not be imprisoned and certainly should not be kidnapped and held hostages for almost a month now. And they are not bargain chips in a war game. They're not part of this. And this is not a war. It was a terror attack, a horrific terror attack.
Unfortunately, we do see this terror group using that child as a pawn in their play there. Well, earlier, Israeli President Isaac Herzog spoke with our Middle East Now anchor Laura Celia, a conversation about the war with Hamas and other related issues. Here is that discussion. Let's take a listen.
Mr. President, first of all, thank you so much for talking to I-24 News. We appreciate it.
Thank you. It's a pleasure, and I want to congratulate I-24 for going from strength to strength, especially in these very challenging days.
Thank you. Thank you so much. If I could begin the interview by asking you about your own personal experiences of that dark day, October 7th, what you saw, what are the memories that will stay with you?
Well, it started with a huge siren, and when there's a siren, I automatically know it's war, because I live during weekends in the same home I grew up in. And when I grew up in it in 1967, we dug trenches. We didn't have mamad, we didn't have a shelter then. We dug trenches, all us, on the entire family, assuming that there will be war a few days before the war started. And during the war itself, we were in a trench listening to the bombing and shelling on our homes, then in northern Tel Aviv. So automatically I took my wife to the shelter, but it was kind of mind-boggling. It's Simchat Torah, it's beautiful weekend after a beautiful holiday of Sukkot. And I immediately understood that it's something else. It doesn't make sense, so I opened up TV. I was planning to go to synagogue, but from that moment on, life changed immediately. Because I kept on asking, why can't I hear Ophir Liebstein, the head of the regional council of Sha'ar HaNegev? Usually when there are missiles from Gaza, rockets, he immediately goes on the radio and explains what's going on. And I kept on telling Michal, where's Ophir? He's a good friend of mine. Why doesn't he answer? Why is there no interview with him? And an hour or two later, it was immediately announced that he was killed in battle. But we were totally uninformed about what's going on. And only through the media channels and reporting, we understood that it's hell has wreaked upon us, and we are going through this cup of agony and pain ever since.
Despite that, I mean, I've spoken a lot over the past month to survivors, people whose families have been taken hostage, people who have witnessed things no human being should ever witness.
Absolutely.
Despite that, there is still this kind of October 7th denialism, people, doubting what happened, people saying perhaps the Israelis are exaggerating. Do you think, for that reason, that the body cam footage that the terrorists themselves recorded those films that were shown to accredited journalists, should that be shown to the wider world, or do you think there's no point, some people will never really believe what happened?
Some people will never really believe it, because if they hate us, they hate us. And if they're prejudiced, they're prejudiced. I still recall from my father's biography, he wrote in his autobiography his description about the liberation of the concentration camps. He was one of the first soldiers, officers to enter Bergen-Belsen in Germany as a British officer. And he tells the story how he went to various camps and of course took many German officers and generals as prisoners of war. And there was one high-ranking officer who said, "I don't believe for a moment what you're talking about that happened in the nearby camp. Although there was smell and there was everything was clear to all the neighbors." So my father took him there. He told him, "If you show me that, and it's true, I will take off my sword, I will take off all my ranks, and I will break it," as like a German officer of dignity admitting. And that's exactly what happened. And my father took him and he vomited and he cursed and he admitted, and so forth and so on. The same I wish I could do to all our enemies who say, of course, it's terrible, or those who support them, or those who are accomplice with them, or those who say, okay, but. No, there's no but. The world cannot accept this type of brutality, atrocities, sadism, non-acceptable by any norms. It has nothing to do, truly nothing to do with the conflict, with the borders, with the Palestinians, with settlements or anything. It simply has to do with hate, and with a whole civilization of hate that wants to wipe all of us off the map, that wants to reign in the Middle East and the rest of the world. It's a jihadist school of thought that the world cannot accept. And it's not a war only between Israel and Hamas. It's a war between two major concepts of life, a civilization that wants to run the world in with certain rules of the family of nations, or a civilization that wants to wipe everybody's head, chop their heads, and reign the world according to fundamentalist rules.
Well, quite. Yet, despite this, the Hamas leaders themselves keep going on TV and radio and making comments. Just yesterday, one of them spoke to the New York Times. He said, "We want perpetual war. We wanted this. We wanted a violent response from Israel because we don't want anyone in the region to have peace." Yet there are still people who maintain that they are freedom fighters, they are representing the Palestinian people and their legitimate grievances. What do you say to this?
So they're hypocrites. They're hypocrites, or naive, or simple anti-Semites, or all of the above together. At the end, the truth is the truth. One needs to admit the truth. The truth is the truth. Women and young girls were raped and butchered and brutally molested, and babies were killed and burnt. And I can go on and on and on. This is unbelievable. Since the Holocaust, we haven't seen such an number of Jews being killed in one day, but killed brutally and tortured. And when you speak to those in the rabbis in the morgues who identify the bodies, they tell you they've never seen such wounds in their life inflicted on bodies and on human beings. So first and foremost, people have to admit to the atrocity. That's it. Then you have to discuss about all other issues as well, which we are in taking care of. Of course, uprooting Hamas and aiding the civilian population in Gaza, whilst working tirelessly to bring the hostages back home.
Well, it is, of course, the job of the media to report the truth. And I wanted to ask you about the international media. Do you think that there is an anti-Israel bias? Taking, for example, the BBC, who refused to refer to Hamas as terrorists. You yourself gave an interview to the BBC. They took out a portion of your answer.
I gave a 28-minute interview to the BBC, to a very distinguished interviewer who came especially to meet me, and she actually knows me for many years. And they left only 6 minutes, chopping it, by the way, and editing it in a very negligent way. It's not my job to go and start quarreling with them, but I must say I'm quite dismayed, and I would have hoped differently. But it's not only the BBC. There's a kind of this school of thought in certain quarters of the Western world that does not understand that this is a war on their life, on their ability to enjoy decent, liberal, modern, progressive, democratic life, or any other ability to live well, even if it's not a democratic country. Nonetheless, at the end, most of the rank and file of the international leadership understands this, and they are taking a firm position supporting Israel. And I'm seeing expressions of support day in, day out by leaders, predominantly, of course, President Biden, Vice President Harris, and the entire U.S. administration and both sides of the aisle in Congress, but also definitely, as you know, United Kingdom, France, Germany, and many, many other important nations. So the world understands. The world we live in, with digital impacts of brainwashing like TikTok and other things, does not explain to the average person the complexity of this situation and the clear need for moral clarity.
Well, you have been speaking to world leaders like Vice President Harris. Do you feel, though, that the window of legitimacy, as it's termed for Israel, is running out, and there is increased pressure for a ceasefire or tactical pauses, as President Biden has called them? We had, of course, that statement from the G7 yesterday. Do you feel that pressure that Israel is losing?
Yeah, but the G7 starts immediately. The first demand is the release of the hostages. Mm-hmm. And everybody agrees the hostages must be released. It is unacceptable by any norms that kids, 10-month-old baby to a 85-year-old Holocaust survivor should be there at all. So I would like to reiterate what Prime Minister Netanyahu said just 2 days ago. Mm-hmm. There will not be any ceasefire without release of hostages. And the whole discussion about humanitarian pauses, I must tell you, I haven't seen, I'm unaware of any response from the Hamas side to any of these ideas. I see a lot of news, a lot of spins, a lot of background noises that come from third parties. Nothing is put on the table. We are progressing dramatically within the Gaza territory to uproot Hamas infrastructure, and our military is doing an incredible job. It's very complicated, challenging, dangerous, but they're doing an outstanding job to uproot the ability of Hamas to have military capabilities and to uproot their infrastructure so that they won't be able to rule Gaza.
Well, that's Israel's military objective, isn't it, to destroy Hamas completely. The Americans were criticised for going into Iraq and Afghanistan without a plan for what those countries would look like afterwards. Does Israel have a plan, or at least a vision, for what Gaza should look like?
So a lot of that is being discussed, of course, by the government. The President of Israel doesn't deal with it on a daily basis. There are many ideas. It is an opportunity the day after to enable the Palestinians in Gaza to live in peace and prosper. But let me tell you, when we pulled out of Gaza in 2005, we came to our people and said the pullout will enable Gaza to become the Hong Kong of the Middle East, or one of those, beautiful sites that can evolve economically, successfully. Mm-hmm. Nothing of that has happened. We pulled to the last iota, and we only got terror. We got thousands and thousands of missiles. It became an Iranian platform by coup d'etat in 2007, and this Iranian platform must be eradicated as a platform.
One vision involves the moderate Gulf countries, the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, countries that you have visited, and you did appear to really have warm, friendly ties with the leaders
still do.
Of those countries. Have you spoken to those leaders at all since?
I'm in contact with many leaders in the region all the time. We all understand the geostrategic situation. You mentioned it yourself. You quoted the Hamas spokesperson saying we wanted an ongoing war. Basically, he said, in order to prevent the inclusion of Israel in the region. So we have here two coalitions. One, a coalition of very serious nations and strong nations who want to move forward in peace, in regional security, including the inclusion of Israel in the region. And the other, doing whatever it can to undermine the normalization process. So it is clear that the war is not only Israel-Hamas, it's also a war against the empire of evil, which is headed by Iran from Tehran to undermine the inclusion of Israel in the region.
You were also recently in Turkey. Are you shocked by President Erdogan's violently anti-Israel rhetoric?
I was very sorry to hear that, and I expressed my regret and my frustration and anger about it. But the real issue goes way beyond it. It's the question, as we spoke from the beginning, do we accept such norms in the family of nations? Israel was not wishing to go to war. We are not warmongers. We are peace lovers. We were forced. This war was forced upon us. When I met President Erdogan 2 years ago, I made it clear to him that Hamas is a terror organization just like he feels as towards his enemies. And therefore, when we are bombed in our homes, we must take actions to uproot them and kill them and get them out of the way, get the mob out of the city. And that's exactly what we're doing.
There's been some really upsetting scenes from university campuses in the United States, Jewish students having to barricade themselves in rooms. I've seen recently people being beaten by Palestinians.
Ongoing all over the place.
It seems to be getting worse. You wrote a letter to the head of some of the leading universities.
What do you mean? Not to all the leading. I wrote a letter to all presidents of all universities in the United States. And I got letters, some back, not yet. But the call is very clear. These presidents must intervene. It cannot be that there will be Hamas supporters on campus. Hamas supporters means supporters of people who support and carry out crimes against humanity and genocide. That's what they carried out. They took entire communities and burnt them and chopped them and tortured them and raped them and abducted them. It cannot be in a U.S. campus or any campus that advocates civil liberties and human rights that this will be allowed on campus.
But why do you think the progressive cause has been so hijacked by the...
Well, I think the progressive cause must look at itself in the mirror. And they don't want to, some of them don't really want to look in the mirror. But a lot of the cultures that evolved in recent years has become cultures that are indifferent and ignorant to the real truth of life between good and evil. And they distort what evil is and they distort what good is. I can go on and on about it. We don't have much time, but many people have written about it. And there is a very fascinating publication called Sapir. Sapir is a publication of thoughtful people from Jews and non-Jews who discuss issues that are challenging the Jewish world. And it came out under the auspices of Maimonides Foundation. And one of the publications, one of the editions had to do with the cancel culture in US campuses. There's a whole culture of cancel, meaning you can be the best person in the world, the biggest civil liberties advocate, but if, God forbid, you support the state of Israel, you're canceled. This cannot go on anymore. Cannot go on anymore. It starts with Israel, but will end with the West. They just don't get it. If Israel wasn't there, Europe would be next by these animals that we've seen on October 7th.
And of course, Europe has been repeatedly attacked by jihadists.
All the time.
Amid this spike in anti-Semitism, then in Europe and the United States, is Israel preparing, or should it prepare for a mass wave of aliyah, of immigration to Israel?
It always happens, always happens. And by the way, I met some very distinguished Jewish leaders and media people who came here and said we feel much safer here than anywhere else in the world. And I assume that will be one of the phenomena of the outcome of the war.
And finally, Israelis right now are living through, I think, the worst, the most traumatic period in an already very turbulent history. How can the nation heal? How can Israel get through this?
Look, the cup of agony and pain is filled. And we are seeing real torment, sadness, agony, tears, and emotions. But I told the nation last week, it's extremely natural to express emotions, to express fear, to cry. We have to go through this period of mourning, and but we are a very resilient nation. We came out of the worst atrocities in the past, the worst atrocity that humanity has known, the Holocaust. We built a very strong nation. We are an immense, incredible people, The people here are just amazing. I fall in love with them every minute as I go out with Michal to all sorts of places to see the people. I'll give you an example of what we went through yesterday. 3 sites that gave us, the same perception, the same proportion, the same understanding what an immense nation it is and so much light it has. We started with United Hatzalah in their headquarters down south. And the people who surrounded us was a Muslim doctor who was abducted by Hamas and liberated by the Israeli police, who was a volunteer of Hatzalah, Ethiopian immigrants, Haredi Jews, secular Jews, veterans, Israelis and newcomer Israelis, all together doing great work in helping and aiding people. Then we went to the Home Front Command. We saw hundreds of people working to assist the families of the hostages and coordinating all the efforts on being on alerts and sirens and what's not and resilience, and of course dealing with the needs of all the evacuees, about 230,000. And then we went to Tel Aviv Medical Center, to Ichilov, to the new war rehabilitation hospital. And you go in with these amazing doctors and nurses and of course these amazing soldiers and their families. Nobody will break us, nobody. We are a very strong nation. We shall overcome and we shall prevail and we shall win.
I think that's a very positive note to end on.
Thank you very
President
much.
Herzog, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And President Herzog spoke about the situation in the United States. Let's go now to the U.S. because last night in Los Angeles, a special screening was held at the Simon Wiesenthal Center for Jewish community leaders there, Hollywood figures and journalists. They were shown some of the unedited footage of the atrocities committed by Hamas on October 7th. Israeli ambassador to the UN, Gilad Erdan, spoke at the event, while outside, pro-Palestinian protesters reportedly attacked Israel supporters out on the streets. This, of course, as the community in LA is still reeling from the death of Paul Kessler, a 69-year-old man who earlier this week died after allegedly being assaulted by a pro-Palestinian demonstrator while he was carrying an Israeli flag. Now, police there have questioned the suspect in the case, but they have not arrested him. Well, joining us now from Los Angeles is Israel Bachar, Consul General of Israel to the Pacific Southwest. And Mr. Bachar, thanks for joining us. First of all, tell us about this event last night at the Simon Wiesenthal Center.
Yes, we gathered 300 people in the Simon Wiesenthal Center, and I think the center has its own message, the place itself. That's what we chose the place. It's a place that documented the atrocities of the Holocaust, and it has by its side also the Museum of Tolerance. So we are resolved. We are aware of what the Palestinians did to us or the Hamas did to us, but also remember our Jewish values. And it's kind of funny to me and weird, that we are in this kind of a center that pro-Palestinian protesters are coming out and trying to interfere in the fact that we are doing such a solidarity night for Israel and looking with open eyes at the atrocities that were done to us. So sometimes I'm asking myself, what are they rallying for exactly, these pro-Palestinians? Are they rallying for brutality? They are committing brutality, and that's what happened later on in a fight in a gas station in front of the center. So sometimes, we need to look at reality as is and fight even here such brutality and pro-Hamas incidents. So we are here, and we are going to continue to show the movie more and more here in LA and in the region and in other states like Arizona, Nevada, Wyoming. We're going to do it, Colorado. We're going to do it, and we're going to show these atrocities that being filmed in the movie.
All right, and I know this Gal Gadot had some hand in arranging this. I believe her husband was there. Are figures in Hollywood, in the entertainment community, and in the LA community, they're rallying around Israel at this time? Because, of course, it is in some areas, as we know, an area of controversy and divisions there in the U.S.
Sure, it is, and it was for the last 20 years. But I think that this time, a lot of people in the industry, Hollywood industry, understanding that this is something different, and some people even are confused a little bit, because for the last 20 years, we heard a lot of a new framing, which is, we can criticize Israel, but it's not really criticizing the Jews. But I must be positive in the sense that a lot of people are rethinking their position, old position, supporting Israel, condemning the atrocities, rallying for humanity. But at the same time, and that's a positive, that's very positive. And I'm urge every producer, every actor, everybody in the industry that wants to meet and wants to understand more, please call us. I'm going to sit and we'll explain each one of them, the realities on the ground in Israel. And it's not sometimes, it's not easy to change position. If you held a position for 20 years, it's not easy to come and change your position. But we urge them to look at realities as is. However, I also want to say there are people who are not out there. They are not speaking out. And I call it the Hall of Shame. People who do not understand what happened on October 7th and cannot even just condemn the atrocities. Something is wrong with their understanding of reality. So I call each one, every Jew, every American, and everybody in the industry who do not understand what's going on to educate himself, learn, and stand up for humanity and for anti-Semitism.
Right. Well, one who did speak out, of course, is Paul Kessler. May his memory be a blessing. This man who was killed, apparently, earlier this week. Police say, from what I've read, LA police say they're investigating it as a homicide. They question the suspect, but he was released. Talk about the impact of his death there on the community, and if you have anything to say about more about the investigation into his death, please do.
The investigation is still going on, but the issue for me, it's more deep. The fact that a Jew is standing up in the corner with a flag supporting Israel, not supposed to be ended in his burial. He's supposed to come back home to his family. He's not supposed to come to hospital and then lose his life. That's something that's unacceptable. So I urge the authorities to do whatever they can to find the truth and to do the right thing that they need to do. And we're hopeful that that's what's going to happen. It's definitely affecting the Jewish community in LA. People are more afraid, agitated, and more careful. People are coming together more. And people also, some of them, I'm hearing that some of them even taking mezuzah off their doorstep because they're afraid to be singled out or to be hurt. But yesterday I was with Ben Stein, the Nixon Library, and I must quote him. He said, 50 years after the Yom Kippur War, there is a new Jew. There is the fighting Jew. So I think that all American Jews need to be a fighting Jew, fighting anti-Semitism, fighting the wrong ideas, standing up, fighting for Israel. And, this distinction between, or the framing that was before, between I'm willing to criticize Israel and sided with his enemy and criticizing Israel, and that means I'm not criticizing the Jewish people. I think it's false, especially at that time. And we need to come together, all the Jewish people, with our friends in America, and there are many friends in America. There's a lot of Americans that support Israel, and it needs to be said, but to come together and fight it and be a fighting Jew.
All right, a fighting Jew. Israel Bachar, you're taking up your post there in Southern California at a particularly challenging time, it has to be said. We wish you the best of luck. Thank you for joining us on I-24 News.
Thank you very much, Caleb. Bye-bye.
All right, well, we've discussed, of course, the southern front, Gaza, even down south to Eilat, and, of course, the escalation of violence in the West Bank. There was still an exchange of fire across Israel's border with Lebanon as well, and, of course, and beyond that in Syria, reports of airstrikes at certain targets there, and also involving the United States, and reportedly, allegedly, perhaps Israel as well. Let's go to our correspondent Mary McAuliffe in the north there. Mary, still we see that that sort of almost become ritualistic exchange of fire between either Hezbollah and other terror forces in South Lebanon and the IDF there on your side.
Absolutely, Kalev. It's become very formulaic here. We continue to see Hezbollah launching these anti-tank missiles across the border into areas in northern Israeli communities. Today we saw sirens ring out due to constant mortar shelling coming from inside Lebanese territory into Israeli communities. Important to remember that most of these communities along the Israel-Lebanon border have been evacuated, but we have seen Hezbollah routinely also now try to hit some of these military observation posts as well as areas where units were stationed. Hezbollah, for its part, said today that it targeted an infantry unit in one of these communities along the border, and the IDF said in response it launched forceful attacks at the source of the launches of these fires. It's just one of numerous times that the IDF struck inside southern Lebanon today, all in reaction and in retaliation for these attacks that were coming from within southern Lebanese territory.
Right, and of course reports of military activity in Syria as well. Of course, Israel not claiming credit for this, but the U.S. is also saying it is also attacking Iranian-linked militias, other Iranian proxies there, and of course always the danger this could escalate regionally.
Absolutely. So we've seen Israeli forces on high alert here, but certainly throughout the region, people are on high alert. Also, the United States has been working actively. They've been inside Lebanon in recent days. They've been sending envoys to try and address the situation. The U.S., for its part, has always said if there's going to be further de-escalation in the region and further violence, they're going to blame these Iranian-backed proxies. Those Iranian-backed proxies in Iraq once again claiming attacks on U.S. bases. At least 4 different attacks today in Syria were reported. That's according to the Pentagon. Attacks and spreading also throughout Syria in Mosul, Erbil, Baghdad. All of these seen areas housing U.S. troops, all coming under attack by drones as well as missiles. This is now, there have been at least 40 attacks on U.S. bases that have been housed. The U.S. said yesterday that it launched these retaliatory strikes against these Iranian targets. Israeli strikes also reported inside Syria.
All right, Mary McAuliffe there on the northern border. Thank you for that. And Ariel, again, the U.S., what's interesting here is the increasing involvement of the U.S., which its forces have also becoming under attack by other Iranian proxies there in the north.
It's happened. An American official was just quoted by Reuters saying that they were attacked 4 times in the past 48 hours, and as Mary said, over 40 times.
I just wanted to show this, a live picture from Gaza. Looks like very heavy airstrikes. We heard that from Robert Swift. That's from the Gaza Strip. Obviously, heavy fighting still going on there in particular. Okay, I'm sorry.
Indeed, no, as it has been going on
right.
in recent weeks, and this is these continued attacks on U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria. On the one hand, they're being responded very quietly, tacitly by the U.S. Not even the same responses that Israel is conducting, as we're seeing in response to attacks on the northern border. I mean, when Israel's attacked on the northern border, it immediately responds to the source of fire. That's not the U.S. policy. They're trying to lower the tension as much as possible, trying to absorb these attacks, but indeed they're taking a toll. In addition to one contractor who has been killed, there are multiple injuries in each one of these attacks, and this is something that remains in the background as the U.S. is increasing its military presence off the coasts of Israel.
All right, Ariel Osra and Jonathan Regev, please stay with us. We're coming to the end of this hour, but we will continue this broadcast. As I said, very eventful day, very heavy fighting on several fronts in Gaza, in the West Bank, drone and possibly missile attacks on a lot, proof of life of 2 of the hostages. We'll carry on this broadcast live, Israel's war against Hamas. Stay with us.
Israel is at war. Make an investment in Israel bonds. It is the most powerful and direct way to stand with Israel. Visit israelbonds.com and invest now.
Made for Me, a unique concept in Israel. Custom-made men's fashion to your measurements. Made for Me, designer of all your events. Schedule your appointment at www.madeforme.co.il. Made for Me, official dresser of I-24 News.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Over 1,300 people murdered and more than 3,000 injured, and the war with Hamas continues. We bring you first-hand testimonies from the front lines, from those who survived, and all the records of the atrocities by Hamas. Follow us as Israel fights terror from the south and north. Get the inside scoop on what's going on. Only on I-24 News.
Esta semana en News 24, Israel bajo ataque. News 24 en español trae el análisis y la información de los acontecimientos de la guerra Espadas de Hierro.
Entrevistas exclusivas, reportes desde la zona de guerra, la reacción de los países hispanoparlantes.
News 24, el único medio en español que te mantiene informado y conectado con la comunidad latina en Israel. News 24, únicamente en I-24 News.
Welcome to or back to this special broadcast on I-24 News. I'm Caleb Ben David. It's day 34 of Israel's war against Hamas and an eventful day on several fronts. The IDF reporting major progress in its Gaza ground operation, saying its forces have taken control of key Hamas military strongholds in and around Gaza City. Falling in that battle is Reserves Master Sergeant Dov Moshe Kogan, bringing to 35 the number of IDF troops killed inside Gaza. There was a major flare-up in the West Bank as well, as IDF troops clashed with terrorists in Jenin, uncovering a weapons cache there. 14 Palestinians reported killed in that firefight, and 2 more in other clashes near the city of Bethlehem. In the Red Sea resort of Eilat, a drone managed to slip through Israel's air defense systems and explode on impact at a school. No injuries reported. It's not yet clear from where the drone was launched, but it was reportedly Iranian-made. Later on, a missile was intercepted heading for Eilat by Israelis' Iron Arrow missile defense system. And just in the past few hours, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad terror group released videos of 2 Israeli hostages being held inside Gaza, 77-year-old Hana Katsir and 13-year-old Yagil Yaakov, both of them kidnapped from kibbutz near Oz. Hamas Islamic Jihad said that the 2, both of whom reportedly suffer from health issues, may be released for, quote, humanitarian reasons. Now, as in previous instances, I-24 News will not air those videos in accordance with the wishes of the families of the hostages. And still with us in studio, we have our defense correspondent, Jonathan Regev, our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osran, and joining us in studio is Douglas Murray. He's a prominent British author and commentator. He's been outspoken on a number of subjects, sometimes controversially so. One of those issues has been the influx of Muslim immigration into European nations, which he charges is helping undermine the democratic values of Western societies. He's also been outspoken in his defense of Israel, especially in the current conflict, effectively making the case for its battle against Hamas in the media, and he's now here even doing some field reporting from down on the Gaza border. Douglas, before we speak, I just want to note, today is the 85th anniversary of Kristallnacht, the Night of the Broken Glass, the Nazi pogrom aimed at the Jews of Germany and Austria. The German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, spoke in Berlin today at a memorial ceremony, and he had this to say.
waren vielleicht dabei, als Edi Pachler.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jews have been marginalized for centuries, still and again, even here in our democratic Germany, even after the violation of civilization committed by Germans during the Shoah. It is a disgrace. It outrages and shames me deeply. Any form of anti-Semitism poisons our society, as Islamist demonstrations and rallies are doing now. We do not tolerate anti-Semitism, nowhere.
Douglas, we'll get to what you've seen here and be doing in Israel in a minute. But I just ran that clip because it was striking that Chancellor Scholz mentioned the Islamist rallies being seen in Germany and linking that with anti-Semitism, even with the Nazi period. I said before, outspoken about, as you see, the influx of or the impact of the Muslim immigration, eroding of some democratic values. You've taken some heat from from that, certainly. So I want to get your reaction to what we've been seeing there in the streets of Germany, in the streets of the UK, from with these rallies, which are not just pro-Palestinian, but in many cases pro-Hamas.
Well, you say I've been outspoken. I haven't been outspoken. I've just said what everyone can see with their eyes.
But not everybody has spoken out about, so that's why I say outspoken.
But it's not controversial. What I've said for years has been that if you import people from different places in the world, you also import the problems from those places. If there was a war tomorrow between India and Pakistan, it would break out on the streets of Britain as well, because we have very large populations from both peoples. It's inevitable that if you allow very large influx from the Muslim world into Europe, into Britain, that has consequences, as we see in America. Much small immigration to America, but it has a very palpable effect. You know, you've got to remember that in Europe, far-right anti-Semitism of the kind that we saw in the middle of the last century is so toxic, it is so pushed to the margins. There are still some scummy people who play around with these dark things, but they're nowhere near the center of power anywhere in Europe, and haven't been for 80 years. There are some people on the far left of politics who do play around with the same dark things, particularly the anti-Semitism, and they come a little closer to the centre. Jeremy Corbyn in the UK, who laid a wreath, remember, at the grave, or said he was present at the laying of the wreath of a grave to the people who carried out the Munich Olympics massacre. He got a bit too close to power, but effectively the British public said, we don't like this stuff, we don't want this noxious anti-Semitism. But there is a bit of it from the far left in Europe. But the main driver, the people who were marching down the streets in the center of Berlin the other day, they're recent arrivals in Germany. And what we're hearing now from Schulz, from other prominent German politicians, is, I think, an overdue acknowledgement of the fact that because Germany, since the last war, decided it had to show itself to be a bastion of liberal values, and decided those liberal values included liberal immigration values, a country that did not need more anti-Semites has imported millions more anti-Semites. Now that is going to be a very big problem in the years ahead, principally for Germany, as it is in my country, in Britain. It is very noticeable that it is the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, the First Minister of Scotland, Humza Yousaf, and the head of Labour in North Scotland, Anna Sarwar, who were the first people in the Labour Party to call for the ceasefire and break the party's rules on this. Why? Because, like much of the Muslim world, they don't care about their fellow Muslims. I'm convinced of this and can argue it all evening. They don't care when hundreds of thousands of Muslims are killed in Yemen. They don't care when hundreds of thousands of Muslims are killed in Syria. There has been not 1% of the people on the streets of Europe in recent weeks who marched in those days. They don't really care. What they do care about is when a conflict involves anyone from the Muslim world and the Jews. The simple rage, and I have worked for years with moderate Muslims, with liberal Muslims, with Muslims who try to evolve on all sorts of issues with their religion. The one thing that it is hardest to get even the most liberal Muslims over is the right of Israel to exist, to self-determine, to defend itself. And we see the results, which are hundreds of thousands of people across Europe marching against the Jewish state. And by the way, I mean, I live in New York much of the time. It's the same there. The day after the massacre on October the 7th, I went down to Times Square. There was an anti-Israel protest. How do I know it's anti-Israel and not just pro-peace? Well, the people waving placards glorifying what had happened 24 hours ago was one giveaway, as it was that they didn't even allow Israel to mourn the dead. They hadn't even found the dead before these people turned out. I think it's a deep shame for a country like mine. We should feel intense shame that it's on the streets of London that people are calling for jihad and intifada. We had a taste of intifada, by the way, ourselves on our London Underground. It's intense shame of the Australians that it should be Muslim migrants into Australia that stand outside the Sydney Opera House and chant "Gas the Jews." This, I always say, Israel has, as everyone in this room knows and everyone watching knows, many problems of your own, political problems, all sorts of issues. You can deal with those problems. They're your problems. But this is our problem.
Right. Well, let's talk about that now in the context of Israel's current battle against Hamas. As you said, even those people who say that they're friends of Israel are pressuring Israel for a ceasefire. We hear again the accusations that the response is disproportionate, even among people who are Israel's closest allies.
Yes, well, I mean, I would say Israel is the one country in the world never allowed to win a war. You always have to, at best, have a draw. It's like Israel can be attacked, and Israel is allowed to attack a little bit in order to return to the moment just before the attack. That doesn't seem fair to me, nor does it seem to me to be consistent with the rules of war historically. Wars finish when someone wins and someone loses, and the victor knows they've won, and the person who loses knows they've lost. The international community, it seems to me, including my own government in Great Britain, never allows this to happen. And don't forget, I mean, this is...
So it has been somewhat more supportive of Israel this time, you have to say.
It is supportive. As I always say, we have a Democrat president in the United States and a Conservative Prime Minister in the UK who have been very supportive. It's true that at the penthouse level in politics abroad, it's okay. The foundations, however, are rotten. Are rotten. You go 2 generations below Joe Biden in the Democrat Party, you do not have the intense pro-Israel feelings that Joe Biden has.
Well, it's a mix. I would say there are some politicians, and
by the way, we've had the Republican Party. I'm not making a political
I understand.
point.
There are some exceptions, and Richie Torres is a congressman from New York, for example. There are exceptions. Let's talk about what you're doing here. What brought you to come here to Israel, and what you've seen on the ground here.
I always come to Israel during wars, partly because I like to see with my own eyes always what I'm writing about. I do that with any war I'm writing about. I was in the Ukraine last year, reporting from the front lines of that conflict. I thought it was very important to be here and see what was happening with my own eyes. I was in one of the kibbutz you mentioned earlier yesterday, seeing the remains of that community. And I still think that the international community hasn't really allowed Israel time to even grieve what happened. It's extraordinary to me how I spend my life in news and media, but it's extraordinary to me how this story got knocked down the news agenda within 24 hours maybe. And I think it's important, over to my New York Post column tomorrow from Nir Oz. I think it's very important the world knows more about this. I think many people don't realize this was like a battalion-sized terrorist deployment into Israel. And I think the stories need to be told, and told far more even than they have been so far. And I suppose the second thing is I want to see what's happening on the ground. That's why I was at the Gaza border and doing more in the days and weeks ahead.
Well, if you could stay with us, Douglas, because you mentioned that October 7th, of course, attack, or even beyond that, you might say. There is some interesting development relating to that today. A bombshell investigation by the NGO Honest Reporting suggested that photojournalists in the Gaza Strip may have known in advance about the October 7th massacre, and that's creating a storm in Israel and beyond. A senior correspondent, Owen Alterman, reports on how the episode is raising questions about the roles of some journalists in the conflict, while, of course, sparking anger across Israel.
Pictures of the October 7th massacre, not only from Hamas perpetrators, not only from Israeli survivors, but also here from photojournalists entering Israel from Gaza, the subject of a report out Wednesday from the pro-Israel watchdog group Honest Reporting.
What were they doing there so early on what would ordinarily have been a quiet Saturday morning? Was it coordinated with Hamas? Did the respectable wire services, which published their photos, approve of their presence inside enemy territory, together with the terrorist infiltrators?
The central questions are about the role of a journalist. At what point is a journalist too cozy with a terrorist organization? And at what point must a journalist step out and prevent a war crime? At the expense of that journalist's core role, documenting events and explaining reality.
They were there. They witnessed terrorist attacks, these people. And instead of trying to stop these terrorist attacks. They photographed them to the world. They did things that were unethical.
One photographer, a freelancer working with AP, seems to have relished the attack, and here is seen smiling with Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas in Gaza.
If there were journalists who knew about the massacre, who stayed quiet and filmed while children were being massacred, they are no different from the terrorists and will share the same fate.
There, senior Israeli leader Benny Gantz drawing his conclusion Thursday, with a unit of the Israeli Prime Minister's office calling the photographers, quote, partners in crimes against humanity, and asking media outlets for clarification, as Israelis focus their anger at those they see as Hamas's helpers.
And there has been some reaction from some of these media outlets since that report was prepared. AP, the New York Times are saying none of their staff members had any advanced knowledge of the attacks, and they deny that any of their regular journalists crossed over in the border into Israel. At least the New York Times does, though there was one, CNN, I believe, did say it would no longer work with one of those reporters. Of course, Douglas, this raises some questions about the role in the media, and anyone who has looked on YouTube and seen you in the last over the last few weeks has seen you in some very combative interviews with the media, and this conflict in particular, I think, because of, again, as you said, the ferocity of the atrocities committed by Hamas would have certainly made Israelis feel this was something different, and yet for some the narrative of the media went back to a very familiar tone fairly soon.
Oh yeah, it's always familiar. I mean, everybody knows how familiar it is who watches this conflict. The normal thing is for entities like, for instance, the BBC, CNN, New York Times, is anything that comes out from the Israeli authorities is treated with intense skepticism. Saying things like, according to Israeli government sources, which is a sort of warning sign. It's a scare quote. And yet, as we know, for instance, with the hospital car park bombing the other week, they will quote not just Hamas's account of something, they'll quote Hamas's figures on something. The thing that people didn't pick up as much as the original error there was the fact that nobody could explain where the figure 500 came from.
Right.
The only explanation was that somebody in Hamas made it up, handed it to the media, and then the media ran with it. Well, this is the same media, by the way, that is constantly telling us that we have to fact check and that they are the fact checkers. The BBC even has a reporter whose full-time job is meant to be to discover disinformation within the world media and enlighten us. Well, she should walk to the studio next door and she'd hear it going on all the time. This is a big problem for the media, but it's a consistent one. They consistently believe the terrorists. And there's, of course, and some people watching will know this, there's a structural problem within journalism in the West, which is, in a place like Gaza, it is very hard to find somebody who is an honest reporter. It's the nature of it. I've known enough Palestinian journalists in my time, as everyone here has, who have not been able to operate in the areas they used to operate in because they've said one critical thing about one Palestinian figure who's in charge, and that's it for them. So inevitably, everyone is compromised. Everyone is compromised who's reporting from a zone like Gaza, and the media believes it needs the sources, and instead of putting the scare quotes around the Hamas sources, they put the scare quotes around the Israeli government sources. And this has been, the good news about this is that in this conflict, in my view, the response to this is far, far better advanced than it has been in any other conflict. There is now a whole ecosystem of organizations, people like Honest Reporting, you cited there, of actual fact checkers in the media, groups, organizations, individuals around the world who actually do chase this stuff up now and bring it to huge notice. And we have the advantage of this being able to go around the traditional media sources and go straight to the public through social media. So there's a battle on in the social media as in the real world. But I think actually that a lot of the truth is coming out in this conflict. A lot more of the truth is coming out in this conflict than any conflict in this region I've covered in the last 20 years.
All right, Douglas Murray, you're one of those people here now reporting. Thank you for coming to Israel at this time of conflict, and thank you for joining us on I-24 News.
Great pleasure. Thank you.
Now let's move to the U.S. Last night, the leading candidates vying to be the Republican nominee for president in 2024, minus, of course, the clear frontrunner Donald Trump, took part in a primary campaign debate in Florida. Now, there was some disagreements on issues like abortion and the best way to deal with China, but on Israel's war with Hamas, mostly agreement, including how to deal with Hamas supporters in the U.S. Here is some of that.
I was the first presidential candidate to say, if you are here on a student visa as a foreign national, you're making common cause with Hamas, I'm canceling your visa and I'm sending you home. No questions asked.
Anti-Semitism is just as awful as racism, and we've got to make sure they're protected. And for everybody that's protesting on these college campuses in favor of Hamas, let me remind you something. Hamas said death to Israel and death to America. They hate and would kill you too.
Well, for more, let's go to our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim in New York. And Mike, a fair amount about Israel in this particular debate. Not a lot of disagreement, maybe at least with one candidate taking a different tone, but certainly, especially Nikki Haley vying to be trying to make it clear to voters that they're going to have Israel's back.
Yeah, it was a debate that was heavily ensconced in foreign policy. It was really surprising to see, and nobody really outside of the first few minutes challenging the clear frontrunner, Donald Trump, on any issue at all. A very confusing debate, but no doubt Israel was a part of it. In fact, the Republican-Jewish coalition was a co-sponsor of yesterday's debate, which was noteworthy in and of itself. First time a Jewish organization has taken part in sponsoring a presidential debate, whether general election or primary. But yes, Israel and the Israel-Hamas war, certainly a focal point for a good deal of the debate. Some parts that we didn't hear, Nikki Haley was asked, well, what do you do with Hamas? And she, almost like out of a movie, said, finish them, finish them. Meanwhile, Ron DeSantis pretty much in agreement there. Vivek Ramaswamy, kind of the contrarian of the debate, who I don't think really helped himself throughout the course of events yesterday, continuing along his line of, hey, we'll do everything to support Israel diplomatically, but he kept inferring that as far as financially goes, they're kind of on their own. He kept up that foreign policy line of his own. But in terms of the quotes that we heard of what's happening here in America right now, it was something that went unheard a moment ago. Nikki Haley said, what if it was the KKK that was demonstrating on these college campuses? These presidents would be going nuts, she said, comparing it to how presidents are reacting so nonchalantly, for the most part, to what's happening on campuses here in terms of Hamas supporters demonstrating there on those campuses. So for the most part, everybody falling in line to the Republican, talking points on Israel-Hamas. But again, I don't think anybody gained too much ground on Donald Trump yesterday, which was kind of the point of the debates to begin with. Nikki Haley likely won. Ron DeSantis, I don't think, hurt himself. But in terms of the trajectory of the Republican race, it seems unchanged after yesterday.
Correct. And certainly President Trump, by the way, chose to appear in Florida, not by coincidence, at the same time as that debate. Mike, let's move on to U.S. President Joe Biden. He spoke briefly to reporters today while boarding Air Force One. He was asked about potential ceasefire proposals for Gaza. Take a listen. Sounds not so great, but let's take a listen.
We're hopeful. Things are moving along.
Did you ask for a 3-day pause to Netanyahu?
You know, I've been asking for a pause for a lot more than 3 days. Yes.
Did you ask him to pause for 3 days to get the hostages out for that?
Yes. I've asked for even a longer pause for some of them.
Mr. President, are you frustrated with Prime Minister Netanyahu that he has not listened more to some of the things you have asked him to do?
It's taking a little longer than I hoped.
It's taking a little bit longer?
It's a very interesting, this underlying tension between, the Israeli government and the Biden administration on ceasefires or humanitarian pauses. The U.S. saying there's come to an agreement to allow a 4-hour humanitarian pause each day in Gaza to allow civilians to move south. Israeli officials saying that's nothing new. We've been doing that anyway. So clearly there is still this tension between, at least on this issue, between the two governments.
You know what? That's number one, it's expected, and number two, it's okay to some extent, because in the end, although there is disagreement on how to go about winning this war against Hamas and the humanitarian implications of it, at the very end, what you're hearing day after day, hour after hour, presser after presser for the White House, whether it's Biden, whether it's John Kirby at the National Security Council, whether it's Tony Blinken at the State Department, they begin and end every one of those press conferences and statements with essentially the same thing, if not verbatim, then in effect, we have Israel's back here. So the disagreements over how many hours the pause is going to go for or for what purposes, those are things that can be worked through. And even in the disagreements that can't be worked through, there are other areas where they can find common ground on and appear to be finding common ground on. So I wouldn't read into too much into those little disagreements that are happening right now between the two governments, because they just have somewhat different interests at this point in terms of the humanitarian concerns there in Gaza. Israel more focused on making sure that Hamas is torn down once and for all. The Americans see things from a different perspective, foreign policy-wise, and so there's some natural tension in there. I don't think it's a deal breaker for either side, these little arguments that they're having right now.
Okay, Mike Wagenheim in New York, and Jonathan, thank you, Mike. And Jonathan, this whole issue of of a ceasefire, we've heard it again and again. We've heard also from this evening, no ceasefire, but there will be, as we said, a new phrase, that has exited the lexicon in terms of this war, humanitarian pauses.
I've been in the South since the beginning of the week, and every day from 10 to 2, it's not a ceasefire, but let's say it's less fire, let's call it this way, to allow people move from the northern part of the Gaza Strip to the southern part of the Gaza Strip, and you can actually hear it. You're there in the morning, and there's very heavy artillery. Then at around 10 o'clock, it stops, not necessarily until 2, but maybe until 12:30, 1 o'clock or so, and then it resumes. So I don't think anyone has signed a paper saying we will hold our fire for 4 hours every day or so. But it's happening on the ground. It's happening on the ground. There are some hours during the day when there's the artillery is less intense. So it seems to be happening on the ground as it is. On the issue of a bigger ceasefire, Israel said it loud and clear, whether it's the Prime Minister, Defense Minister, or anyone else, you want a ceasefire, we want the hostages, a very large number of hostages.
Right, and not this number that they're talking about, 15 or 12. But, and keep in mind, there were over 20, just for example, Thai nationals being held in Gaza.
Right, Caleb. Look, the reports in Arab media are that the negotiations right now are revolving release of foreign nationals. They're not talking about Israelis. This is in the reports. But if we go back to the humanitarian corridors, my understanding is that the agreement with the U.S. is supposed to increase to have another corridor, and that's what we should be talking about. Not pauses, but corridors. Corridors means that it's specified to a geographical area, and that's in those geographical areas, one, the current corridor, and the second, the new corridor. There will not be bombing, but the bombing does continue elsewhere, and that's why calling it a pause I don't think is precise. Okay. According to the IDF, 80,000 Gazans made their way from north to south, as well as over 700 humanitarian aid trucks already making it into Gaza.
Okay, Ariel Osron, Jonathan Regev, stay with us. We'll be back with more of this broadcast in just a few minutes. Be right back.
Israel is officially in a state of war.
This is a very active scene, and we need to get in the car as we're talking.
More than 100 soldiers and civilians have been kidnapped.
Help us, we don't know what to do. We just don't know anything.
Entire families, including babies and children and elderly, were butchered in their beds.
Awaken the giant, and we are ready and we are strong.
Everyone is showing up. This is the unity.
Welcome back to this special broadcast on I-24 News. Right before we went out to the break, our Middle East correspondent Ari Osseron mentioned the supply of aid into the Gaza Strip, because even while battling Hamas, Israel continues to facilitate the supply and passage of food, water, medical supplies inside Gaza for the civilian population there. Our Pierre Kloschendler went down to the Nitzana border crossing into Egypt adjacent to Gaza to see close up just how that process is going.
We're at the Nitzana border crossing between Israel and Egypt, and these are trucks that are going to cross to Egyptian territory, reach the Rafah border terminal, and transfer food, water, and medicines to the Gaza Strip, to the non-involved Palestinian population there. This is like a life supply for that population. It carries all kind of food supplies, energy bars, water, as I said, medicine. 100 trucks a day, more or less, are reaching the Rafah terminal from Egypt and crossing into Gaza. The colonel that is in charge of the whole operation said that it's in coordination with the Egyptian authorities. These are Egyptian trucks from the Red Crescent Society, and with coordination with the UN. Let's hear what he had to tell us.
This operation is with coordination with the Egyptians, the UN, the IDF. It's a complex, I would say, operation, but it's very efficient.
The colonel said that he hopes to increase the number of trucks that will cross to Gaza. Right now, 100 trucks in batches of 20 trucks each time, after they've been inspected by the Israeli authorities. But there is 1 hour drive between Nitzana on the Egyptian side and Rafah, the terminal to Gaza. He ensured that also this is taken care of.
The convoys that are going out from Nitzana to Rafah is being monitored every second, every meter by the IDF. And these convoys are also coordinated with the Egyptian army.
It would have been simpler to have Israeli trucks do a back-to-back at the Kerem Shalom crossing between Israel and the Gaza Strip, or at the Erez crossing between Israel and the Gaza Strip. Yet both terminals were destroyed during the war when Hamas waged its massacres on October 7 on Israeli territory. And thus, Nitzana is the only solution. This is Pierre Clochendler, I-24 News, Nitzana border crossing, Israel.
And now, give us a sense of some of the scope of that aid that is going through, because it has increased substantially since the beginning of the military operation.
Right, Kalev. So as I mentioned a few moments ago, we have reached the point of over 700 aid trucks that have entered the Gaza Strip so far through the Rafah crossing. And I think it was very interesting in Pierre's reporting that the inspection appears to be in Nitzana, but not in Rafah. So the question is, what happens to the cargo from Nitzana to Rafah? That's something.
And that's been an issue of some controversy about who gets to inspect the aid, whether Israel's controlling it.
But Kogad, the military branch that is responsible for this such coordination, issued a tweet a few hours ago saying, "We've doubled our humanitarian aid inspection capacities. We call on international agencies to increase the aid that they send into the Gaza Strip." I think that's a very interesting call on international organizations, saying that the fact that there's such a limited scope of aid going in, you cannot put that on Israel. Israel can now double this. If the day before 64 trucks entered, saying we have doubled our capacity of inspecting them, you are more than welcome to increase the capacity of aid going in. So far, we have not seen an increase in said trucks from yesterday.
All right. And as I said, Jonathan, the concern that we mentioned before about the inspection really has to do with the possibility of weapons or even fuel being shipped into Gaza through Egypt.
So here's an idea. You said, Ariel, 700 trucks or so, right?
Have already entered.
Have already entered. They can come in with their tanks full of fuel. And that fuel can be perhaps then downloaded in Gaza, and they can go back, those trucks back to the Egyptian territory, a very short distance, say from Khan Yunis back to Egypt, can come empty. Where's all that fuel? In Gaza. I don't think there's a clear and good, effective way to make sure what comes in. Yes, there's far less cement or ammunition or anything else, wartime material that go in now if we compare it with a month and a half ago. But still, those things can come in, and this is why Israel is so concerned about that all those humanitarian convoys going into Gaza. We know very well that the assistance will eventually not end in the end of the civilians, those who really need it, but Hamas will smuggle it for its own purposes.
All right. Gentlemen, stay with us. We're going to go back to our correspondent, Mary McAuliffe, there in the northern border. And we've mentioned, Mary, here in the studio, the displacement of Israelis. Of course, there's been a lot of focus and attention placed on those living in the Gaza border area, those communities having to relocate. But people kind of overlook the fact of how many tens of thousands have had to move away and wanted to move away also there from the northern border.
That's right, Cleve. There's some 70,000 residents, that's specifically the northern border area, who've been evacuated to move. That's all of those within 4 kilometers of the border, primarily because they are within this anti-tank range that we continue to routinely see Hezbollah launching across the border, not just at Israeli military positions, but also at civilian communities. Today, we had a visit by Benny Gantz here, and he met with the heads of the local and regional councils, and they were trying to pass along the message, trying to urge the government to try and do more to protect this border area. We've talked to a number of residents in the past few weeks as we've been traveling here, and many of them are very fearful to come back to their homes. Of course, there's a small contingency of those who've remained on the ground, but many of them have looked at the events that happened October 7th and are very fearful of the similar events happening here. There's some communities that lie just meters away from the Lebanese border, and they have lived with this threat from Hezbollah for years. So now we're just seeing an uptick in violence, but many of them are saying they really don't know when they're going to feel safe for them to come back home. Many of them packing for months at a time, but Benny Gantz today urging them, saying that they're doing everything they can to try and protect this northern border, and that just while all eyes are really focused on the south, there are not less eyes focused here on the north, that the military is trying to do everything it can to try and...
All right. All right. Looks like we've lost sound on Mary McAuliffe there in the northern border. And gentlemen, again, today wasn't any major incidents on the north, but especially what's going on also with Syria, reports of more airstrikes there, allegedly by Israel, and those clashes we mentioned before. The U.S. concerned that northern border could heat up.
And look, it is heating up gradually, slowly, every day since October 7th. Now, the thing is that's interesting to look at is that the equation put forth by the Iranian axis and also Hezbollah is that as Israel amplifies its ground operation in the Gaza Strip, so will they respond in like and also increase their response against Israel. But Israel has entered Gaza, has been in a ground invasion for about 13 days now. That we didn't. The only change that we saw was not on the northern border, but that was the entry of the Houthis into the equation. Last night, the army announced that it has the largest amount of forces, or even earlier today, the largest amount of forces operating inside Gaza in over 4 decades. And the amplification that we've seen is a missile from Iraq sent to Israel, and this indicates that while we are seeing an escalation on the northern border, which includes bombing gaps in the border fence that remain open, and Hezbollah is amplifying this on social media. On the other hand, the steps on the ground indicate that Nasrallah or that Hezbollah is not interested, at least in the immediate present, at a full-scale war. Now, every time we say what the intentions appear to be, we have to take a pause for caution and a little bit of humility following October 7th. But indeed, the only thing we can do is analyze the steps in the immediate horizon according to what we're seeing evolve on the ground. On the ground, the situation continues to evolve, but it does stop short of a certain threshold that we're not seeing be passed by Hezbollah, at least not over the past 34 days.
All right, gentlemen, as the military operation is being carried out, people in the government are being very careful not to speculate too much about what we call the day after. They say we have a job to do to eliminate Hamas, free the hostages. We'll deal with that subject when those jobs are done. Nevertheless, certainly discussions behind the scenes. The U.S. has been pressuring. Secretary Blinken just mentioned that whole subject at the G7 in Tokyo the other day. Yair Lapid, the opposition leader and head of the Yesh Atid party, also spoke today earlier with I-24 News, and he had this to say about the so-called day after the completion of Israel's military campaign against Hamas.
We only have bad choices, but between those bad choices, the lesser bad is that the Palestinian Authority will be back in Gaza. They have the infrastructure there. They have 20-some thousand people already working for them in Gaza, with a very strong support system of the international community and the Arab world. But on top of this, we will have to maintain our ability to enter Gaza whenever we think it's necessary in order to secure our borders. So it's going to be some sort of a B zone, B area, like we have in the West Bank, in which the Palestinian Authority is running things on the civil side of it, and Israel has the security control over what is happening.
But Mahmoud Abbas has no credibility amongst his own people. His support is so low. So how is that even a viable option?
Well, first of all, it is a viable option because this is what is going on the West Bank. On the other, and besides, this is why I said we're going to need an unprecedented support system from the international community and the Arab world. Saudis, the Jordanians, the Egyptians, the Emirates, everybody's must be involved.
Jonathan, well put by Yair Lapid. There are no good choices for Israel for this so-called day after. The Prime Minister on down have said that Israel does not want to reoccupy Gaza, but it's concerned about how to maintain security, how to make sure forces of Hamas just don't reassert themselves in Gaza. There you have Yair Lapid speculating about perhaps giving the Palestinian Authority role. Not a popular position with the majority of elements in the current government, for sure.
True. The current government will not allow that to happen, period. They're unhappy with the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. They will surely not want to see the Palestinian Authority returning to the Gaza Strip. And if we're speaking of the Palestinian Authority, if Israel wants them to stay in place one way or another, it will demand Israeli presence. The only reason why the Palestinian Authority is able to run the Palestinian Authority is because Israel is around. If Israeli forces were not entering there night after night after night and were present in the area, then Hamas would take over the West Bank just as it did in the Gaza Strip. Let's remember, in 2005, there was a disengagement. All of the Israeli forces, all of the Israeli civilians left the Gaza Strip and basically handed it over unilaterally to the Palestinian Authority. This was the solution in 2005, but the Palestinian Authority is basically unable to run anything. That's why Hamas took over in 2007. If the Palestinian Authority will be back there and without any Israeli presence, then Hamas or some other organization will take it over. Therefore, if you want the Palestinian Authority somehow to run it, it would demand some kind of an Israeli presence, or at least some kind of Israeli nightly incursions, just like we see in the West Bank now. When Israeli forces come in night after night after night, there will not be any other option. Of course, the story of the West Bank and Gaza is a different story. What do you do with what we call here the Philadelphia route, the one which separates the Gaza Strip from Egypt? Can Israeli soldiers go into Egypt to inspect? Can they go under the ground?
Of course, Israel controls all the border crossings between the West Bank and Jordan, but it does not have that control between the Gaza Strip and Egypt, and that would be a major change for Egypt to accept.
Of course. So Yair Lapid speaks about sort of an Area B, what is known as Area B in the West Bank, where the Palestinian Authority has control of civilian matters and Israel has control of security matters. But again, what would the Egyptians say? They're a side here as well. What about all the tunnels that we know are running even now, even with President Sisi in Egypt? We know he doesn't like Hamas. We know he wants to maintain good relations with Israel. And yet those tunnels are up and going. So what do you do with all that? Very, very big and serious and complicated questions, which will have to be answered the day after.
And kind of, yes, sorry.
No, if I may, we're talking about the day after and the cooperation with Egypt, but we have to look at the day prior and how we got to this. And Israel, or the blockade on Gaza in 2007 was imposed by Israel and Egypt. For 16 years, this blockade has been joined, and it's not clear how Hamas got all their weapons, if there's a blockade also from the Egyptian side, how a month before October 7th, 500 Hamas fighters, terrorists, exited the Gaza Strip somehow, made it to Tehran, and training in Iran with the presence of the Quds Force commander. This is happening while Egypt is on our side, while Egypt imposes the blockade on the Gaza Strip. And so any talk about the next day also needs to refer to grievances or mistakes, perhaps, done in the days prior, and that will be the only way that Israel can ensure that the threat in Gaza will not amplify and will stay as it is after it defeats Hamas.
All right, kind of distressing that the West Bank model is even being considered as an alternative for Gaza. Talk about the least bad choices. Now, two international conferences regarding the Israel-Hamas conflict took place today, one in Paris, the other in Riyadh. Both saw calls for an immediate ceasefire amid a report of a meeting between the heads of the Mossad, CIA, and Qatari officials over a hostage release deal. Our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osran, has more on that.
Day 34 of the fighting between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. And on Thursday, diplomacy finally took a front seat. In Doha, the heads of the CIA and the Mossad met with the Qatari Prime Minister to discuss the parameters for a hostage release deal and a pause in the fighting. According to a report in Reuters, the trilateral meeting came after Qatari mediators met Hamas officials on Wednesday night to discuss a potential deal. The meeting comes a day before Qatar's emir travels to Egypt to meet with President Sisi in Cairo, where Hamas chief Ismail Haniyeh is currently visiting.
Qatar is adamant on continuing its effort based on our policies and humanitarian values related to the release of all civilian hostages. Our goal is to return them to their families, but also to our brothers in Gaza to be able to live in safety and security.
Israeli leaders have so far shot down any talk of a ceasefire until Hamas frees all 239 hostages, including 35 children. But in a humanitarian conference on Gaza in Paris, French President Emmanuel Macron called for a ceasefire, while Egypt's foreign minister rejected attempts to displace Palestinians to Egypt.
Today, the situation is grave and is getting worse each day. In the short term, we should work on protecting civilians, and to do so, we need a humanitarian pause, very quickly, and we have to strive for a ceasefire. This should become a possibility.
We condemn all practices aimed at imposing a new status quo by forcing Palestinians to flee, forcibly transferring them and removing them from their lands. The number of displaced persons in Gaza has reached 2/3 of its population. This is in itself another serious violation of international humanitarian law.
Meanwhile, in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia hosted a gathering of foreign ministers from the Arab League ahead of the league's emergency meeting on Saturday. And so, over a month since Hamas's onslaught on southern Israel, the Middle East is showing unity in at least one thing: fear of the conflict spreading into a broader regional escalation.
Now, we began this broadcast this evening with that news out of Gaza, proof of life of two of the 239 confirmed hostages being held there by Hamas and other terror groups. Another of those is 22-year-old Evyatar David. He's been described by his family as a young man full of life, love, music, and dreams. Evyatar, excuse me. But that life has been put on hold and potentially worse since he attended the Nova Music Festival attacked by Hamas terrorists on October 7th. He was subsequently seen in videos being taken into and then held hostage in the Gaza Strip. Well, joining us, Evyatar's brother, Eli David. Eli, thank you for joining us. Well, tell us something first. Tell us what happened in the morning. How did your family find out and learn about what was happening to your brother?
Well, we all woke up to the sound of the siren and we ran to the bomb shelter. It was very early in Saturday morning. And my mom started texting my brother, and he was saying that everything's all right, the festival's over, and they are running away, so don't worry. He was coming, my mother, and all of us, and it took an hour and a half, sort of, for him to lose contact completely. He was disconnected around 7:45 a.m. And from that moment on, his friends lost connection with us. We heard on the news that there was a full-scale attack on Israel. And from that moment on, we just started thinking what we can do, who can we ask, where can we look him. And it took 6 hours, very hard and painful and helpless hours, and we eventually got 2 videos of Hamas. It was really actually propaganda videos.
Right, these propaganda videos that they released after the attack, or even during the attack on social media.
Yeah. So both of them were released in Telegram. And we saw my brother, in one of them we saw him walking handcuffed,
right,
with his hands behind his back. His shirt was torn. being led by a terrorist. He was holding a gun in one hand and my brother in a headlock with his other hand. And on the second video, which came alongside the first one, we saw him inside a dark room with other 4 guys. They were all kidnapped from the festival. One of them was my brother's best friend, Guy.
He was at the festival with.
Yeah, he was him with the festival, and that was actually at the first moment it made me so furious to see my brother so frightened and so humiliated. That was really devastating for me.
Now, yours is one of those cases where you were able to see your brother there being held conclusively. You could see it in that video that was released, alive inside Gaza, being held captive. When did the government contact you about his situation?
So
how long did that take?
It took 2 days.
2 days. Even though right on that day there was already, you could say, proof of life, at least that he was taken into Gaza.
Yeah, but again, we try not to blame anyone. It was so chaotic in the first 48 hours. Everyone were confused. Everyone tried to collect data. So it's fine. I'm not angry about that.
No, I understand. I understand. So let's talk about, I see you're wearing this T-shirt, Bring Evyatar Home Now. The efforts family to raise awareness. And of course, you know, we are not just a local channel here in Israel, we're an international channel. What message you might have, also just for the international community, about your brother and of course, all of the hostages?
So I'll start from that.
Sure.
It's a nightmare for us, and I think that the situation which young boys and girls are going to celebrate in a festival of peace, and,
the Nova Festival.
Yeah, and the only crime they committed was to celebrate and have fun and dance, and hundreds of them were murdered. Two of my brother's best friends were with him, and they were murdered. And that's something that cannot happen again nowhere. And also I think all the time about the children and the elderly people and the sick people being held there.
Unfortunately, two extreme examples we saw this evening. A 13-year-old and a 77-year-old woman, both supposedly suffering from health issues.
Yeah. And we don't know anything about them. We don't know anything about the other 240 hostages. We have no information about them.
Right.
And we don't know if we know that the Red Cross is not coming to them, and that's something we demand.
Right, there was a protest outside the Red Cross offices in Tel Aviv. Demanding that they make a greater effort to get access to the hostages.
Exactly, that's something that we crave for. I mean, we know really anything about them, and we want to know just to know what their medical situation is, to know that they are alive and healthy. And if not, again, that's something we need to know. And I called for any government in the Western world and worldwide to help us get that information and help us get our loved ones back.
All right. So, well, we certainly join you in, first of all, we join you in the mourning of the lives that were lost, as you said, people who were certainly close to your brother. And of course, we will join you in the desire to, as you say there, bring Evyatar home now and bring all the hostages home now. And hopefully he'll be home safe and sound sometime soon. Eli David, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
On I-24 News. I want to thank Ariel Oseran, our Middle East correspondent, senior defense correspondent, Jonathan Regev, for also joining us. That ends this particular broadcast. But stay with us. Eli Hochenberg will be carrying on at the top of the hour. So Strictly Security will be joining us next. So stay with I-24 News with its continuing coverage.
Made for Me, a unique concept in Israel. Custom-made men's fashion to your measurements. Made for Me, designer of all your events. Schedule your appointment at www.madeforme.co.il. Made for Me, official dresser of I-24 News.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Israel is officially in a state of war.
This is a very active scene, and we need to get in the car as we're talking.
More than 100 soldiers and civilians have been kidnapped.
Help us, we don't know what to do. We just don't know anything.
Entire families, including babies and children and elderly, were butchered in their beds.
Awaken the giant, and we are ready and we are strong.
Everyone is showing up. This is the unity.
אזור ישיבה לילדים.
Esta semana en News 24, Israel bajo ataque. News 24 en español trae el análisis y la información de los acontecimientos de la guerra Espadas de Hierro.
Entrevistas exclusivas, reportes desde la zona de guerra, la reacción de los países hispanoparlantes.
News 24, el único medio en español que te mantiene informado y conectado con la comunidad latina en Israel. News 24, únicamente en I-24 News.
Hello and welcome. Good evening. I'm Yoav Limor, and this is a special edition of Strictly Security, brought to you live from the Jaffa port. It's day 34 of the war in Gaza, the war in Israel, but it is a trilateral meeting in Doha that might change the course of the battle. The CIA chief, Mossad chief, and the Prime Minister of Qatar discussed a potential hostage release deal ahead of an expected trip of the Emir of Qatar to Egypt tomorrow. The IDF will allow a 4-hour-long tactical pauses in the ground operation in Gaza, but in the meantime, IDF forces took over more of Hamas general headquarters in the city. I-24 News was on the ground in Gaza, embedded with the IDF forces for a close look at the progress. Let's begin. So we're live from Jaffa this evening, as every week. For the next 90 minutes, we'll try to bring all the updates and analysis to you, starting now. The IDF is, as we said, progressing in Gaza, driving deeper inside the Gaza city and exposing terror infrastructure, but Gaza is far from being the only active arena. I-24 News senior defense correspondent Jonathan Regev with the details.
The Israeli flag rises high and the anthem is heard on the Gaza beachfront deep inside the Gaza Strip. Shortly after, IDF tanks appear on the beach road running down the Gaza City coastline. Step by step, the IDF takes on a bigger part of Gaza City. As the forces move forward, they once again see how in Gaza there's no distinction between terror and civilian infrastructure. This stairway leads to a terror lab where explosives are made and suicide drones are manufactured. Next to it is a shaft leading to a terror tunnel. And what's right next door? A room where 3 little girls used to live, right next to the terrorists.
October 7th came from here. Came from houses like this. From houses like this, 1,500 Israelis were murdered or slaughtered.
The main Hamas headquarters are mostly located under the Gaza ground. Those above the ground are well entrenched in residential areas where civilians are used as human shields. As opposed to Hamas, the IDF is interested in keeping civilians away from the fight.
We're trying not to harm innocent people. We give all the people who live here a good heads up that we're coming. We need to evacuate till the Gaza Lake, which is going south.
While this is happening in Gaza, there's no let-up of the anti-terror activity in the West Bank. A major operation took place in the city of Jenin on Thursday morning, as IDF forces entered the city under heavy fire from local terrorists. Palestinian reports say as many as 10 militants were killed in the operation, as other Israeli forces also entered the Balata refugee camp in the city of Nablus, another terror stronghold in the West Bank. Along with the northern border, there are 3 constant active arenas, meaning the IDF is fully stretched and ready to engage on all of them.
Let's bring in our guests here in the studio. Reserve Major General Eitan Dangot, former military secretary to 3 ministers of defense, and Colonel Olivier Rapovich, IDF spokesperson in reserves for the international media. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us this evening. So, Eitan, put me on spot regarding the operation on the ground. Where is the IDF currently? What is it trying to achieve?
I think IDF is coming to the major step in Gaza, and it's running, I think, in a way that with a lot of safe steps, professional steps, and succeed to surround all the north part of Gaza. Gaza already has been divided. The main half of Gaza in the north is now under Israeli control. And above it, we are surrounded now the hospital in the center part of Gaza, which is the symbol of the headquarters of Hamas in the underground and upstairs, and we are in a stage in order to take it. The moment it's taken, I think we are going to finalize with another areas that till now was not caught by the IDF but only by fire, and we will complete the mission as the first step that we put in our goal to destroy Hamas structure, destroy the leadership of Hamas, and to prevent any more for Hamas to be presented in Gaza as an entity.
Olivier, we see the IDF putting a lot of shades, and everything is very spooky when it comes to what the IDF is doing and not doing. If I was Hamas, I'm not so sure I would understand what's going on. Even being Israeli, it's very hard to understand. And that is deliberate. What exactly are you trying to achieve?
I think you put the point in the right direction. Actually, there are a lot of forces on the ground. But from the very beginning, as you know, and you are specialists in the field, it's not very clear what the IDF is actually doing, where and what. And that's because we need to make the situation not clear for the enemy. And Hamas right now, underground mostly, is not capable to really, I would say, define what are the moves from the IDF.
So while we speak, we see Gaza at the same time, and we see the Air Force is still attacking. We see all those attacks coming from Gaza. What exactly is going on?
Right now, the main goal is to go within what we call in Hebrew the Kiryah of the Gaza city center, which is the headquarters, command and control facilities of Hamas within the Gaza city area. It is a very difficult process to move because we have to be very careful, very cautious, as you know. But the result today, it's around 50 casualties from Hamas. Many of them are still underground, not very clear how many exactly have been killed, but the mission is going on right now.
Olivier, and two big questions. One, the Shifa hospital. Everybody is asking whether the IDF is going to go inside or not. And second question is a potential hostage deal in return for a ceasefire. What do you say?
Ceasefire, no way. No way in any sense right now. There are only what we call, I would say, a window slot of time in order to make people move from the northern part of Gaza City to the southern part. Yesterday it was 50,000 Palestinians who moved with white flags. Today, I don't know the figures, but I think it's also a quite big number. Concerning ceasefire, no way. And it is a political decision, as you know, and for now, the Prime Minister.
And Shifa Hospital?
Shifa Hospital remains the one, not only, but one of the main central places for Hamas facilities, and it's full of tunnels and underground facilities. It will be a big piece to deal with, but the Army and the Minister of Defense today say that there are new means to deal with underground facilities.
So, Eitan, I ask you that the Shifa Hospital, the main headquarters, a symbol. On one hand, if Israel goes in, it tells everybody that there is nowhere in Gaza which is sacred, which is safe. On the other hand, it's a hospital. All the world will be against Israel. So what do you do?
I think it already has been started. The last week or even before, IDF spokesman every day is giving information about the cynic use of hospitals all over Gaza for terrorism.
But Eitan, it's not new. You served as Kogat. It's not new. They use hospitals, they use journalists, they use ambulances, they use everything.
We never came in such very clear goal that this time the war is above all. We are not going to pass on the law of war, but we are not going to pass on witness that we will give to those murderers instead of leaving them in this place. Shifa is the junction or is the heart of the main center of the north part of Gaza. Meanwhile, even I was aware about it, there is efforts to build a new structures of field hospitals, of fleet hospitals in the south area of Gaza. I believe that in around 2 weeks already, you will see a change of movement because more and more countries that support Gaza, convinced from the facts that we show them about the terrorism that is used in the hospitals.
And let's speak about the ceasefire. Should Israel be in favor of, against? Because the Americans ask, they give Israel a lot of money, a lot of support.
No ceasefire in this stage, and we cannot break it. Secondly, ceasefire can be discussed only for releasing 240 hostages returning back to Israel. That should be the two main conditions by Israel to those countries who are dealing. It's very cynic the way they are trying to use or return on the system, release to stop for a day, stop for 8 hours. This is the system of Hamas.
And we must say, Eitan, that today there was another film released by Hamas, the Islamic Jihad in this case, and we decided not to broadcast it. We don't play their game.
But by the way, remark, it's strange that Jihad Islamic going a little bit on the side, and I don't see, from my experience, I don't believe was such coordination between Hamas and Jihad Islamic. I think that Jihad Islamic is trying to jump on a track. They feel they missed the opportunity to get prisoners or something like this. We have to put it on the side, as you said, and to continue in our way. We convince Hamas only by power.
So stay please with me. Hamas was well aware that the October 7th terror attack will lead to an Israeli incursion into Gaza. They prepared themselves for this incursion, mainly through hundreds of kilometers of tunnels scattered all along the Gaza Strip, which are now being used to fight the incoming forces. I-24 News senior defense correspondent looks at the challenges rising from these terror tunnels.
This is the greatest danger awaiting the IDF forces maneuvering deep inside the Gaza Strip. Hamas terrorists rising from a tunnel dug under the ground, firing anti-tank missiles or placing IEDs and quickly disappearing. Many of the Israeli casualties in Gaza were hit this way. Hundreds of such tunnels exist below the ground of the Gaza Strip, and those terrorists can pop up practically everywhere. And as is so common for Hamas, the presence of civilians is never a consideration.
Here you can see the IDF soldiers exposing a tunnel opening. This is part of an operation, a ground operation that was conducted on the hospital, then revealed a tunnel that was being used for terror infrastructures in the Qatari hospital.
As the forces now go deeper into Gaza City, more and more such tunnels are being exposed. It is an extremely dangerous mission, as you never know what awaits below the ground, and those tunnels can rise up to the ground in every location.
אנחנו מעריכים שגם פה איפשהו יש חלק של תת-קרקע, אנחנו עכשיו ניכנס ונחשף, אבל ממש אפשר לראות את המתחם שיגורים מתוך הלונה פארק והפארק משחקים של הילדים.
This is the reason why heavy artillery is pounding on every area the army is advancing into, especially when there is intelligence regarding tunnels. That intelligence is superb, but no one has the illusion that every tunnel will be detected and destroyed. It means this threat will continue to loom on the forces operating in Gaza for weeks or maybe even months to come.
So let's speak about the tunnels, Olivier, the challenges that are facing the forces.
We talk about 500 miles of tunnels all around the Gaza Strip. It's incredible. I mean, it's huge. They prepared them for the last 16 years to make this war against Israel. And it's a big challenge, as you can understand, but there are the means existing in the army to deal with. It won't be simple, but I think we learn with time to deal with that, with this challenge. And right now, many of the operative Hamas are within the tunnels for days, for weeks now, and it's a kind of pressure on them, and we have to put pressure on them with together the military move on the ground.
And that's why. That's one of the reasons Hamas, Eitan, that Hamas wants a ceasefire, because they want to take the food that we brought in, the oil, the fuel, etc., to take it downstairs to the tunnels, which will enable them to stay there for long.
And also, just to add to what you said, and you're right, is to make a reorganization in their situation in the underground tunnels with those who are buried in these places, to organize again attacks against IDF from the fact where they are now. I think that above all, Hamas is every day is damaging slowly but surely, and what is adding day by day bring them to a situation that they will be more and more interesting for a ceasefire. They've never expect to be, in my opinion, even they were prepared in such a situation after 2 weeks of underground or movements.
But in order to win, Eitan, the IDF needs to go and take all the tunnels, or there can be other ways to win?
It should be surround, stop, pushing them to a very narrow places, trying, and it will be done mistakes by their leadership and succeed in killing or some of the leadership. And when you combine together kind of these achievements, you will have on the right place to climb higher. But you need months for it. Remember, you have on the West Bank After the operation in 2003, it took us 4 years to complete the mission. And here also, the mission will be ended only after 2 to 4 years if you clean all the area. But one thing is clear now, Hamas will not be again the entity in Gaza.
And those are, Olivier, those are the goals. One goal regarding Hamas, that it won't rule Gaza and it won't have the force. The other one deals with bringing home all the captives, etc. How achievable is it?
It is achievable because we need this goal to be achieved at the end of the day. For Israel, there is no victory without bringing them back home, in any case. So it will be, I would say, a two-head goal achievement. But at the end of the day, as you can understand, the ground operation is very important. And as much as it's going on right now, and we have quite good results, it shows that it is a right way to achieve the other goal, which is the hostage and the kidnap back home.
Eitan, it's possible to bring the hostages by this ground operation, or it's another tool to put pressure on Hamas in order to get Hamas maybe to crack down or to give up some?
I think it's one of the main tools to bring Hamas to a situation together with the international community, some Arab countries that will see the situation. And as the time is running, Hamas will estimate its situation and will be more and more interesting to make a deal. But the fact is not to release 2, 15 or 20. We need a deal to, first of all, to demand, to release all together and to bring it and to give something for it.
But Eitan, I'll give you a difficult task. I'll make you Yahya Sinwar for a second. If you were him, why would you give all the prisoners, his prisoners, in return for our hostages? Because the next day we will kill them all and kill him. Why should we do it?
Because Yahya Sinwar, at the end, will calculate its situation concerning the future of Hamas in the Gaza or in the area, when we will run more and more. And I think when he will be aware that his life and the life of his organization is going to be very limited, I think it will be changed. And also don't forget, Qatar is the real fuel for Hamas. Egypt is the main gate for see the world. Together, when the time is coming, there is more and more pressures. I think the interest, and Hamas is a very clever strategic organization. They can change their strategic goals, understand they will make Udna for themselves.
Olivier, last question regarding what you do. Trying to explain Israel in the world, it is becoming more and more complicated. If Israel received all sympathy around the world, now we have the governments, but we have less and less the people.
You are right. I mean, concerning the government, I think that the governments, mostly in the Western world, are with Israel. They understand the issues, they understand the need for Israel to protect herself and to fight Hamas. Where you are right, it's about the population, the people, progressive in democracies, and it's more difficult. But I think that it is still very important to continue the dialogue with them. And right now, we are facing a rise of anti-Semitism abroad, but in the same time, governments, like in Europe and even in the States, try to mobilize their forces to make them understand that this struggle in Israel is not only our struggle, it's a struggle for all democracies against Islamism. And I think that for now, even if it's difficult, it's not a lost battle.
Is it possible to convince the people? I mean, look at France that you know better than all of us. You see the demonstrations, you see the people, you hear the sounds, you see the Magen David, which is being drawn on Jewish people's homes.
Yes.
It looks like 70 years ago or 8 years ago in Europe.
I may be going to surprise you right now, but at the end of the day, 80%, according to last surveys in France, are with Israel. 20% are against Israel. And most of them are connected to minorities, connected to Muslim groups. But at the end of the day, the danger in Europe is felt very strongly, and I believe, I'm not sure, that at the end of the day, today, what we are doing in Israel is much more understood than it was before. And for me, it's a quite good surprise, but we have to continue to talk, to exchange information.
And while you speak, we see the demonstration live from New York, pro-Palestinian support rally in New York City. And you hear yesterday there was a screening of the IDF movie in LA. You saw the demonstration outside, a very violent, rude, loud one.
There are still minorities, big demonstrations, but most of the people are quiet, and I again believe that they support Israel. This war, maybe the first time for Israel history, is a war that the West and the world understand us. They cannot accept everything, but they understand us.
So, Eitan, last question. Can Israel stay on the convincing side, on the right side?
It will be very difficult. And even I can tell you, in some cases, no, but we don't have a choice.
Eitan Olivier, thank you so much for being with us this evening. Let's head up to the northern border and correspondent Mary McAuliffe. Mary, what's your update for this hour?
Good evening. This past hour has been relatively quiet inside Israel. We had sirens hours ago, and the IDF responded with a number of different attacks inside southern Lebanon. We're hearing reports now, though, coming from inside southern Lebanese territory that there are ongoing airstrikes in the area of Ramia, primarily targeted there. We do know the IDF has been responding throughout the day to a number of different attacks, though. They said a series of mortar attacks were launched at IDF areas inside on the very near the Lebanon border. Hezbollah, for its part, said that it had targeted an infantry group along the Israel-Lebanon border, saying that that was in response to once again show solidarity with the Palestinian people. What we see here is continuing to be a very formulaic response. Hezbollah launching a number of different attacks into these northern Israeli communities, especially areas where they believe the Israeli military is currently operating, and then the IDF responding using a variety of different means at their disposal, from airstrikes to shelling. We can routinely hear the sounds of artillery operating in this area, so definitely continues to be an area where the IDF is on high alert, and they say they're ready to respond to any threats coming from within southern Lebanon.
And Mary, what do you hear from the civil front? Because most of Israelis in the cities and villages surrounding the border evacuated their houses. What do you hear from them and from those who decided to remain, to stay at home?
That's right. So there's some 70,000. That's the estimate of residents who have been told to evacuate from this area. So that's an area that's all within 4 kilometers of the border. Everybody is supposed to be evacuated. But we have seen in the past week, when things were a little bit quieter last week, a number of residents chose to return to their homes. But we saw last week exactly why these restrictions are in place. A family in Kiryat Shmona who had just returned after 3 weeks, seconds away from being hit by a rocket attack. Luckily, all of them came out unscathed, but it's causing the Israeli government to also once again reissue these warnings to pay attention to the home front restrictions. If your area is evacuated, to go to safer parts of the country, especially if they're lying within these 4 kilometers of the border, because this is an area that we continue to see hit by these anti-tank missiles, which Hezbollah is launching across the borders. Those have a range of up to 5 kilometers. That's the estimate we have now. But what we see now is there's no shortage of missiles that Hezbollah continues to launch into these communities. We saw an Israeli civilian killed here just this week. Also in past weeks, we've seen civilians killed as well as soldiers. So it definitely continues to be a high alert area. But the Israeli government is trying to warn those, just because it might not be as hot of an area as down south, the threat absolutely remains.
Yes, Mary, thanks for that. Keep safe. Eitan, last question regarding the north. How close are we, if at all, for another front?
I believe, first of all, I'm not, as everybody, waiting dramatically to Nasrallah's speech. I think that we should keep a high alert. We choose the way not to open and to be the first to open, increasing or to increase the situation in the north. But I believe next week we will have not easy days in the north. If we continue in Gaza to press, it will impact the situation in the north,
Olivier,
but not for a war.
Olivier, we know each other from those days when Israel fought in southern Lebanon.
Right now, it's a conflict management situation. We manage as we have to react when we are attacked, but we consider the main focus in Gaza right now. We are ready for the north, but we are focused on the south, and hoping that the north will remain as it is right now. And we are, as you know, ready for all defensive move and is, if needed, offensive also.
And the world is trying to stop Israel from fighting in the north. It's trying to stop Hezbollah as well.
Iran, much more than Hezbollah.
Yes.
And we are examining today from Yemen few times, don't forget.
Yes. Gentlemen, thank you so much for that. A quick break for commercials, and when we return, I-24 News bring an inside look of the ground offensive in Gaza and much more. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere.
Over 1,300 people murdered and more than 3,000 injured, and the war with Hamas continues. We bring you first-hand testimonies from the front lines, from those who survived, and all the records of the atrocities by Hamas. Follow us as Israel fights terror from the south and north. Get the inside scoop on what's going on. Only on I-24 News.
He tells me these are the picture of
Esta semana en News 24, Israel bajo ataque. News 24 en español trae el análisis y la información de los acontecimientos de la guerra, espadas de hierro.
Entrevistas exclusivas, reportes desde la zona de guerra, la reacción de los países hispanoparlantes.
News 24, el único medio en español que te mantiene informado y conectado con la comunidad latina en Israel. News 24, únicamente en I-24 News.
You're watching Strictly Security, brought to you live from the Jaffa port. Thank you so much for being with us. In the latest round of arms shipments from the United States to Israel, the White House informed Congress that it intends to transfer $320 million worth of precision bombs into Jerusalem's hands. Correspondent Robert Swift has more.
Smart, precise impact, cost-effective bombs, or SPICE for short. The Biden administration is reportedly planning on sending a $320 million package of these precision weapons to Israel. Israeli designed, the systems will be transferred from Rafael USA to its Israeli parent company, the Wall Street Journal reported. Essentially an upgrade kit, the weapons boost the targeting and gliding capabilities of unguided bombs. With these smart systems, it's hoped Israel can more accurately strike Hamas weapons and infrastructure hidden among the Gazan population.
מצאנו פה עמדה של שיגור של רקטות מכוונים לכיוון צפון מתוך שטח הארץ. זה החשמל, והחשמל הזה נכנס עד לתוך המבנה הזה שהוא בעצם מסגד
שממנו מפעילים את הרקטות.
The shipment comes as diplomatic pressure mounts on both Israel and the US over the number of Gazans being killed in Israeli strikes. With more accurate weapons, it's hoped Israel can better distinguish between its enemies and the civilians crowding the Gazan battlefield. But smart bombs are only as precise as the intelligence directing them. And as the conflict continues to rage, the fog of war only thickens.
For several weeks now, hundreds of members of Iran-backed Iraqi militia groups have gathered at the border with Jordan to protest Israel's attacks on the Gaza Strip. They demand to pass through Jordan to reach Israel and Gaza in a move that also has Jordan concerned. Middle East correspondent Ariel Oseran with the details.
As pro-Palestinian rallies continue to spread across the West and the Middle East, there's one country where anti-Israel protests have gone one step farther than anyone.
Our main demand is to allow us to go to Palestine to help the Palestinians. Let them open the borders, and I will head there to fight or to provide moral or material aid. We are ready for anything.
For more than 2 weeks now, thousands of Iraqis have been amassing along the border with Jordan. In addition to showing support for Hamas's October 7th massacre, they demand free passage to reach the Gaza Strip, following a call by Iraq's influential Shiite cleric Muqtada Sadr to hold sit-in protests along Israel's borders until it stops bombing Gaza. And Jordan, which has been one of the most vocal countries opposing Israel's strikes on Gaza, is worried that pro-Iranian militias in Iraq will try to take advantage of the situation.
We will not allow you to desecrate Jordan, and we warn the people of the Popular Mobilization Forces on the Iraqi border. If you come close, Jordan will be your graveyard.
Iraq's support of the Hamas-Iran axis comes as Tehran's proxies amplify their strikes against U.S. forces in Syria and Iraq. On Sunday, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken visited Baghdad and met with Iraq's prime minister to try and prevent the conflict from spreading further across the region. The following day, however, Prime Minister al-Sudani visited Tehran, reaffirming with whom Baghdad's real allegiance lies.
Those who want the conflict to be contained and not to spread to the entire region should pressure the Zionist regime to stop its military aggression and systematic slaughter.
And now I'd like to bring in our expert panel, Mr. Norman Rule in Washington, D.C., 34-year CIA veteran and National Intelligence Manager for Iran at the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, and David Daoud, Senior Fellow at the Federation for Defense of Democracy, is also joining us from Washington. Mr. Rule, we'll start with you. We see the CIA chief jumping from Jerusalem to Doha and back and forth today in Doha, reportedly with the Mossad chief meeting the Qatari Prime Minister. What's on the agenda?
Good evening to you, your viewers, and to my good friend David. It's clear the United States and Israel are using every conceivable diplomatic channel and relationship to see how they can develop an architecture to free the hostages in Gaza. This is a torturous route, but as I say, they're using every relationship that is on the table.
And the Qatari are playing a role vis-a-vis Gaza and vis-a-vis Hamas, we know, but how effective can they be? And what do they want or can give in return?
Well, the Qataris have claimed for quite a while that their relationship with the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas provides them influence. We haven't seen much of that influence in the last month. 4 hostages have been released, and that's a very small number. There's a tremendous amount of suffering, and I think we're watching the limits of that influence and the need to put more pressure on Qatar to terminate its relationship with Hamas as this hostage issue comes to a conclusion.
Yes, David, we've heard yesterday a very interesting saying coming out from Washington by the White House speaker, saying that Israel should give limited ceasefire in order to be able to go until the end, practically, to finish Hamas's story, and that's quite unique coming out from an official, backing Israel so strongly.
Again, thank you for having me on, and it's a pleasure to see you, Norm. It is. At the same time, I think, look, we're dealing with a situation that is pretty unique in and of itself. As I don't need to tell you that the mass casualty attack that occurred on October 7th is unique in the annals of Israeli. Is trying to.
Yes, David, we have some difficulties with the line, so I'll go back to you, Norman. Let's speak a bit about our northern front. You know, starting by President Biden saying to the Iranians and Hezbollah practically don't. But ever since we're seeing Hezbollah trying to, to play with Israel on a limited level, how concerned is Washington from that front becoming more active?
Well, Washington was clearly sufficiently concerned to send its largest, most modern, and most powerful aircraft carrier task force off the coast of Israel. And this task force contains missiles and aircraft that would be capable of helping to protect Israel from any significant Lebanese Hezbollah onslaught. The assignment of the Dwight Eisenhower aircraft carrier group to the Red Sea sends a powerful message that the United States is also sending this massive military deterrent capacity towards Iran. At the same time, there appears to be a level of activity that the United States and Israel and other countries in the region believe is below the line of what would generate a conventional conflict. So we're watching multiple attacks in Iraq. We're watching daily multiple attacks across Israel's northern border with Israel, and we're watching repeated Houthi missile attacks. And the international response from the United States, other countries in the region against those militias has actually been quite thin. So it tells you a line does exist below which there is more strategic patience.
Yes, Norman, and if I take your words, it sounds like, the U.S. is here and is backing Israel, obviously financially and sending arms and giving international support. We see it within the UN, but they're doing everything that is within their power not to be dragged in practically, meaning they do not want to fight.
That is certainly correct. And what is unusual about that is that 39 Americans have been killed and a large number have been taken hostage. I do not recall a time in my professional or personal life when I have seen Americans killed by a terrorist organization, and we did not see a significant U.S. policymaker publicly state in a televised address that the U.S. would do everything it could to bring those perpetrators to justice. The United States and the international community have clearly decided this is Israel's war to fight with as much material, political, and moral support that Washington and other countries can provide.
Yes, David, you're back with us on the same question. How concerned is Washington from potentially being dragged in, if a war breaks in northern Israel after, sending all the carriers into this area and speaking so loudly to try and deter Hezbollah in Iran. If that war starts, will the Americans be dragged in here or maybe vis-a-vis Iran?
I think the preference, as Norm said, is for the United States to keep this war contained. There have been conversations with the Israelis regarding the northern border with Hezbollah to not initiate, not preempt a war with Hezbollah. There were reports in the Yediot Ahronot that Defense Minister Gallant had been prompting Prime Minister Netanyahu to basically engage in a surprise attack against Hezbollah, and Prime Minister Netanyahu apparently pushed back with the American pressure to keep this war contained in mind. I think the United States is positioning assets in the region because we do have assets already in the region, so we're trying to protect those assets. But I think the preference for the United States is to keep this contained. Part of that is demonstrating through deterrence that the United States is serious about reacting to any attacks that may cause the deaths of American soldiers. We're seeing harassment of U.S. troops in Iraq and in Syria, but I think that on the Iranian side, they're also keeping that contained, taking into account U.S. military presence in the region and the U.S. threats, essentially, to keep this war between Gaza and Israel not expanded into a regional war.
Yes, but it's not a war, David, between Israel and Gaza anymore. We saw, as Norman mentioned before, quite a few attacks from Yemen, for example. Today, 3 attacks. One of them actually targeted Israel. 2 were intercepted in a way. The Americans are deeply involved in trying to intercept, stop, deter those attacks, not successfully. Is the Biden administration thinking of doing more? Because such attacks from Yemen, from Iraq, from Syria, from Lebanon might at the end turn out to be a regional war.
Look, I think if we're being honest, this was never a war between Israel and Gaza from the outset. This is a war between Israel and the resistance axis writ large, where one front that the resistance axis has built against Israel, the front of the Gaza Strip, is now active. I think the U.S. preference is to not have other fronts basically reach that level, where we do have a genuine regional war, not just one where we have, a very hot front and ones where there is kind of low intensity attacks. The preference is to keep it kind of where it is now and keep it relatively contained. I also do think there is an Iranian calculus on the other end, where for all their bellicose rhetoric, they realize that some of their assets, particularly in Lebanon, may attack at the current time.
Yes, Norman, back to you. I'll give you a tough task. Put you inside Hassan Nasrallah's mind.
To the hot front. Sorry, you keep losing me.
Yes, we keep losing you. We'll try once again, David, to get back with you. Norman, as I said, I'll give you a tough task and put you in the head of Hassan Nasrallah. Pro and cons of starting a war with Israel, bearing in mind that on one hand, Israel is weaker or perceived to be weaker than it used to be before October 7th, and Israel is heavily busy in Gaza. So it might be surprised. On the other hand, Israel is in no mood to be surprised over again, and it has the U.S. backing it.
Well, there are no strategic, clear incentives for Lebanese Hezbollah or Iran to directly involve themselves in this conflict. As you noted, Israel is alert. Israel is, its intelligence systems are watching Lebanese Hezbollah very closely. Israel has assigned a fair number of personnel to the north. Their fingers are on the trigger. The United States has assigned perhaps the largest amount of military firepower, maybe in the history of the Middle East, but certainly in the last 20 years in the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. There's no element of surprise. If you're Hassan Nasrallah, the idea that you're going to call up reserves while you're still fighting in Syria, while you've lost some of your best commanders in Syria, that you're going to threaten your political position in Lebanon, which is fragile in a very difficult political economic environment, that you're going to open up your hidden missile arrays while everyone is watching, you've really got to come up with quite a significant incentive as to what to do. Now, this said, if he keeps things at the current level, attacks going across the entire border using anti-tank missiles, rockets, small incursions. You're able to divert resources. He's able to have a rhetorical position of support for Hamas, but he doesn't threaten his strategic position. I'd like to note one more incentive not to do something. Israel's intelligence system is showing that it's able to identify the locations of Hamas officials and kill them. If you're Lebanese Hezbollah and you make a decision to launch that operation, you really want to look around the table and say, who is around this table that's going to start disappearing in 48, 72, 96 hours? So that's going to be part of their calculus as well.
Yes, David, back to you. Looking at Hezbollah, looking at Iran, what they're trying to achieve, the smallest organization from within this axis of evil, Hamas, gave Israel the biggest blow in its history. So, looking at them, and they might be asking themselves questions.
Absolutely, but I think, look, as Norm noted, there is an element of surprise that is critical here that Hezbollah has lost. They would have preferred to launch an attack, I think, akin to what happened from October 7th, akin to what happened on October 7th from Lebanon, with the Israelis not expecting it. That's not the case right now. They are taking notes. At the same time, Hezbollah has its own domestic constraints that it has to address, that it can't ignore. They are looking at the Israeli response. They are looking at the efficacy of the Israeli response. They're probably seeing how Israel's defensive systems react, and they are definitely taking notes for a future conflict where Hezbollah finds itself in a more comfortable position to launch a surprise attack against the Israel and be able to bear the brunt of a retaliation, and to have Lebanon able to bear the brunt of a retaliation. Right now, Lebanon is not currently receiving economic aid.
Yes. Norman, speaking of what's going on in Washington, we see the polls. We see President Biden is not very popular within the Democratic Party, which is not very supportive. It's left wing of Israel and of his support to Israel. Should or he change his mind? Might he change his mind of backing Israel, or that's a done deal?
I think it's a done deal for President Biden to stand loudly and firmly with Israel. At the same time, it's not entirely a coincidence that as his poll numbers with the far left and the American Muslim community have plummeted in an election year where his poll numbers are already weak, that he has made a number of statements and undertaken some actions that are meant to demonstrate his also what I believe to be sincere belief of needing to prevent unnecessary Palestinian civilian losses and to do more to allow humanitarian aid to enter Gaza. So there is a political reality in Washington. And I think it's important that we look at this conflict. We should view it as a conflict that is will have consequences we may not entirely be able to predict or imagine. It may take months or even years to play out. But one consequence could well be that this tips the election against President Biden, not because people might vote for his Republican opponent, but because they might be so upset or unhappy, they may not turn out to vote. And that lack of vote could shift an election in key states.
And is there anything that Israel can do to change, the way the American public opinion treats us, Israel?
Well, the propaganda against Israel is both cruel and omnipresent in a number of arenas. I think Israel could do more to communicate how its actions are being designed to limit Palestinian civilian losses. Anything Israel could do to increase the amount of humanitarian aid coming into Gaza, and anything Israel can do to demonstrate that Hamas, vice Israel, is responsible for those losses would help bolster its already honorable and worthy case.
Norman Rule in Washington, David Daoud, thank you so much, gentlemen, for those insights and for being with us this evening. Thank you. Going back to Gaza now for an up-close and personal look into the fighting from the ground level. I-24 News' Matthias Inbar put on his vest and helmet and went into the strip embedded with the IDF's fighting force for a present-time perspective on the war which will determine Israel's future. Let's watch.
We are on our way to the Gaza Strip.
I grew up here at Kibbutz Alumim, so I feel like I'm protecting my home. Since that Saturday we all joined the reserves, we understand that we have a mission, an important mission to eliminate the terror from Gaza.
It's the 32nd day of this war. We are in a troop carrier. Lieutenant Colonel Gilad Pasternak, our military escort, sits in front of us.
We do what we have to do. This is the most justified war possible that we had to fight. It's our duty to be here. It's our duty to respect our commitment, because we have no other place to go. All soldiers, all officers, understand that we are loyal and fight with determination, bravery, and speed to fulfill the objectives set by our leaders.
It's just over 1 month since the terrible Hamas onslaught of October the 7th. The IDF's ground operation has been pursuing its objectives for more than 10 days, annihilating Hamas. Once there, we are the first journalists to discover what the humanitarian corridor looks like. In this war zone, in the centre of Gaza, on the main Salah ad-Din artery, these civilians from Gaza are fleeing the fighting, some with their hands in the air, others clutching a white flag.
We are in the middle of the Gaza Strip. Behind us, just people from Gaza, Gazans, that are trying to escape the war zone. They are walking with their hands up and with a white flag. But these soldiers are trying actually to protect us and protect themselves, because probably there's some terrorist in the middle of this crowd.
Today it has been opened in 9 a.m. and it's about to close at 14 p.m. You can hear clashes and battles between Hamas terrorists and the IDF soldiers, also west to the Salah ad-Din street over there. Of course, Hamas doesn't like the fact that the people are going, actually his human shield are going from the north to the south, and that's exactly what the IDF is trying to do, to separate this population, the civilians, from Hamas terrorists doing their acts of terror inside the neighborhoods, inside the buildings over here.
And perhaps among them, Israeli and foreign hostages.
If they are inside, any people who've been kidnapped or being hostages, run toward the soldiers, don't be afraid.
For both officers and soldiers, the objective here remains the same.
Well, we have a lot of challenges over here. First one of them, of course, the tunnels. We're finding tunnels all over the strip, in all the cities, in all the neighborhoods. We're finding streets. Each building, each compound have its own tunnel in order to be able to sabotage the IDF soldiers. That's the first one. The second one is aerial assets. We are dealing with drones. We are dealing with of course, mortars, with rockets aiming towards the IDF soldiers and the people on the rear in the cities of Israel. And also, of course, Hamas is taking advantages of the narrow streets, of the kasbahs, of the corners, in order to wait for the IDF soldiers to make small ambushes on them. But I can definitely tell you, like the IDF spokesperson told, that today there is Gaza North and there is Gaza South, and the IDF is controlling over Gaza North.
These kind of tools came from the engineering corps. They are trying to protect the soldiers and also detect the tunnel. It's quite impressive inside the Gaza Strip.
It's our duty. We are part of history. It's not a question of revenge, but defending our state, our home. They attacked us. It's our turn to defend our civilians.
An emotional soldier wants to speak.
את מה שאנחנו צריכים לעשות לפני הרבה זמן, אנחנו עושים עכשיו כבר. כל מה שאנחנו עושים עכשיו זה נטו בשביל שההיסטוריה לא תחזור. Everything we do today is to ensure that history does not repeat itself. Ultimately, what my grandparents experienced during the Second World War happened because of hatred of Jews. On October 7, these massacres, these civilians killed, raped, defiled, burned, are the result of this same hatred, exactly what the Nazis did to us.
We're pushing back because there is a sniper threat. As you can see, every place just behind me are potential positions for snipers. That's why all the soldiers and these tools are here to protect us.
Once on board again, we drive east, into one of the Sujaya neighborhoods. An armored vehicle has just fired. We are in the middle of a complex multi-battle operation against Hamas positions. Facing danger under Hamas fire, we were quickly asked to leave the area.
We are in the middle of a war zone. Now you can hear clearly gunfire. We are in an active gun battle zone. And we are in the north, central Gaza Strip. Now the soldiers are facing the terrorists from the Nukhba of the Hamas group. And we are asked to come back inside the vehicles because it's not a safe zone. As you can hear.
Back in Israel, Lieutenant Colonel Gilad summarizes this day of war for us.
It's no secret when I tell you that many Israelis are being held hostage in Gaza. One of the goals of our war is to bring them home. When we see a way to bring them home, or to give us details about their fate, we do it, and I won't elaborate.
While we leave this gathering place on the Israel-Gaza border, these soldiers are determined to fight, regardless of how long it takes and regardless of the cost.
We take a short break. Afterwards, Amos Gilad will be with us. Danny Danon, member of Knesset and former ambassador to the UN, is already with us. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Israel is at war. Make an investment in Israel bonds. It is the most powerful and direct way to stand with Israel. Visit israelbonds.com and invest now.